Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Operations Committee. Sorry for apologies for the delayed at start. Just remember that there are some people on Zoom and microphones off or muted and hands up for questions. Any apologies?
Leave for council meeting.
He's on leave, so we don't need an apology. So I think we can just carry on. Public forum, no one was registered as far as I know. Declarations of interest. And the minutes to be confirmed. Do you know what they were, Kathy?
12th of May.
12th of May 2022. Someone happy to move? Happy to move, Councillor Dowler? Yeah, move Councillor Dowler. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Butler. All those in favour will say aye. Against. Resolution is carried. Thank you. Now we come on to a presentation from Waimea Water Community Dam. Welcome and good morning, Mike and David. It's Mike Scott and David Wright for those on benefit. Kens. Yeah, right. Okay, so my apologies. You do look a little similar. Can those on Zoom see the screen?
We can, but can't hear everything that's being said, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you. That may be that I weren't speaking quite as loud as I should. And people might have used their microphones. Is that any better?
Yes, that's fine, thanks.
Okay. So when you're ready, David.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Mike our CE will take us through a presentation very shortly, but just by way of introduction, on the plus side, pleased to record that we continue to make progress. We're now some 70% complete in terms of construction. We have seen, unfortunately, some further delays to time with the programming of the works, which we will touch on in the presentation. And equally, unfortunately, there has been some further increase to costs that are outside of the control of the project. And equally, we will touch at the end on some remaining residual risks. So that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to pass across to Mike to take us through the presentation.
Thank you, David. Welcome, Mike, and thank you.
And good morning, Council, and thank you for having us again today. So look, by way of overview, the first page here, look on the, as David said, we are making good progress on the dam. The embankment is finished. The spillway is just about finishing this week. The parapet wall, you can see in that photo, is going up. And so the structures are making good progress. And in fairness to the contractor, they're doing a good job in trying circumstances. It's been a really tough first 6 months for them. As you'll see later on, they've lost a lot of time with COVID, and you know, the structures are coming to an end imminently, which is pleasing. We have now adapted the design as required to the geology on site, and that is pretty much going as planned when we spoke last in February. Pleased, as always, about the contractors, outstanding effort on safety. No one's been hurt significantly on the project to date, which I think is a wonderful achievement. As David alluded to, we are now expecting, have been advised by the contractor, that there will be further delays to the project. And as a result of those delays, that does lead to a cost increase to accommodate those delays, and also as a result of sort of ongoing M&E challenges and procurement of mechanical parts. I guess the final point just to note there is that as you were made aware last time, the contractor has initiated dispute proceedings against us.
I think we'd probably prefer to go through the presentation and keep the questions there because may well cover them as we go.
So by way of update on progress, as I said, the embankment was finished late last year. The concrete face has now been finished, and that was a big task, well done by the contractor. So the 12,000 square metre face was slip formed. Each of the slabs is about 78 metres long. It would take 2 to 3 days of continuous pouring. So you can see there the photo on the left, them pouring through the night. The photos in the middle and the right show the completed concrete face on the upstream side of the dam. You can see the parapet walls going in, and that should be finished in the next few weeks. And then our attention really now then turns to the pipe work and the mechanical equipment. And we have had some delays on that, and we can come back to that later. We do expect to install the pipes in the next few weeks, and then look to install the winches and the screens during the third quarter of this year. Spillway. So the last wall of the spillway is being poured this week, and then the spillway walls are finished, and there is the floor, just the top part of the floor to finish, and that'll be done during July. So we expect the most of the spillway to be finished by July, and then the structures above and below the spillway and the OG weir will be constructed during the second half of 2022. So you can see a couple of photos of the spillway here, with the photo on the right looking down the spillway. Mechanical and electrical. So our attention on this project now really turns to the pipe work and the screens, rails, electrical fit out. As you will recall, this was undesigned, unpriced, and uncontracted at the time of contract award when we started the works, and that has been our Achilles heel. We've seen cost and delay pressures associated with that, and they continue to happen. The provisional sum nature of the work means that we are fully exposed to the inflation in this current environment and delays. We do now have most of the materials on site. We ordered the GRP pipe, the fiberglass pipe, and the HDPE pipe last year, and we sort of feel pretty pleased with ourselves that we had it in our yard well ahead of time, because we would have been stuck now. So the photo on the left there shows some of the pipework arriving into our yard. You get a sense of this size of the intake screens that plug into those reducers. This come down from Auckland. The photo on the right is our primary isolation valve, our butterfly valve. That's all now finished, ready to go. This photo was taken last week. The bad news with this photo is that photo is taken in Germany. So we still have 14 tons of valves and fittings in Germany that we need to get to site. The manufacturer of the valves, a company called Earhart, were due to deliver in January. They still left Germany, and here we are in June, and they have been hampered by their own supply chain getting parts into their factory. So the whole world supply chain is just clogged up, and it's slowing everything right down right now. And so we are getting ready now to air freight that valve, 3.5 tons, along with 3.5 tons of fittings from Germany. And unfortunately, with oil at $120 a barrel, air freight's not that cheap either. So the final point of this slide, and we'll get to it shortly, is that the contractor's program to install the works is taking significantly longer than planned and we'd expected, and that's leading to the prolongation of the construction period and the costs. This is for your own own reading at your own time. The progress between when we last talked to you and now. You can see the blue bars show that we've pretty much finished the embankment, the concrete face, making good progress in the parapet wall. You can see that aerial photo on the right. We're sort of filling in the drawing. A couple of points I'd make here is the contractor has faced ongoing resource and productivity challenges. It is a tricky time to procure resources right now, for those that hadn't noticed in the news. The other point I'll make is that during the first half this year, the contractor lost over 7,000 man hours through COVID absenteeism. So pretty much almost everyone on site now has been off with COVID, and it's not just losing people with COVID for a week. It's the uncertainty of people being able to turn up tomorrow night for a concrete pour to allow continuous pours to start, which has hampered progress. By way of example. So the program, as I alluded to at the start and David alluded to, we are now being advised of further delays to the project. We were told recently that there's been a delay to closing and filling the reservoir now to February 23, which is after the second summer. This is in line with what we told shareholders back in May, and subsequently got reported by the press. There's been a few drivers around that. Firstly, the falling resourcing and the slowing productivity on site. The loss of the workforce that we just talked about, and just a large prolongation of the time the contractor believes they would require for the river diversion works and the mechanical works, and we are addressing that and looking to do what we can to mitigate it. We believe that there are options to mitigate some of these delays, and there is the potential for some recovery from what the contractor is advising, and we'll help the contractor on trying to deliver those mitigations. So the Gantt chart there is something you may have seen before. Essentially shows where we're at with the progress against the plan, and I guess the two bars at the bottom really tell a story where the river diversion and the mechanical works is sliding and taking a lot longer than expected. This unfortunately means that there's a revised cost. Since we last talked in February, we're forecasting an increase of another $10 million. Most of that's really associated around the delay to the project, associated with the contractor's forecasts. There is some further mechanical costs. That's a small part, and costs associated with the river diversion. Otherwise, the geology solutions and work is largely in line with what we had expected at the start of the year. The health warning here, as usual, is we cost the work and what we can see and what we know and what we can reasonably expect. What we haven't quantified is the unknown unknowns, such as excessive weather events or dispute proceedings being different to what we expect. Here's the S-curve. So it just shows the 195 stretching out on the left. The funding is shown on the right, and I guess that's a conversation for a different time. But the cost increase under the project funding agreement is as it stands under the contracts met by the TDC. That's the yellow box at the top. We are aware, and Waimea Water Limited is working with both shareholders on a funding arrangement that may lead to a different mechanism. %70 complete by time, top bar, dollars, bottom bar. So both really sort of lining up with time and spend. And finally, just before we go to Q&A, the residual risks in this project, like I just said, we've costed the work and what we can see and know and do and what we reasonably expect. We talked about the COVID and excessive weather still being risks out there. You know, we know that closing the reservoir will be a tricky operation and will be subject to weather, so that may lead to further risk. There is the risk of further delays of getting equipment to site, such as getting these valves out of Germany. And then finally, as I said before, there's a risk around the contractor's claims and the cost of the disputes.
Mike, you're happy to go to Q&A now? Councillor Turley will take you first.
Yes, just an observation that to fill the reservoir in February, it's probably our driest month, so that might be a bit of a delay there. But my question really is around the risk, the disputes risk. And have you any idea, or are there any other challenges in the pipeline at the moment? Because I hate to say it, but the talk around the village is that there is, and I'd like to hear it from you rather than from people in the village.
Sorry, Councillor, so your question's around the disputes or
Yes.
other geological challenges? I wasn't quite sure.
Oh, I know there'll be geological challenges, no, around disputes.
Yep. Yeah, so the contractor initiated adjudication against Waimea Water Limited under the Construction Contracts Act 2002.
Mike, I might just get you to pull the microphone
Yeah,
in.
sorry. Yeah, is that better?
Yep.
Yeah. And the adjudicator determined that their claim was unsuccessful, so we had no more dollars to pay out of that. The contractor has since advised that they intend to dispute the adjudication through arbitration. So this will be basically the 5th time the matter's been considered. We don't yet know the form of any other of the claims that they plan to bring to us, so it's really difficult to comment on the litigation risk right now, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike, for coming along. Be nice one day when you're full of good news. So I just want to check my understanding, and then I've got a couple of questions if I can. So did you just say that we would be closing and filling in February 2023? Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. My first question, and then I've got a second one, Mr. Chairman. My first question, I've just gone back to my notes when you briefed us actually back in February, and at that time I had noted down that we were around about 70% complete. We're now 4 months later and we're still about 70% complete. So I'm just wondering if you can explain that.
Yeah, good observation and sharp eyes, Councillor. Because over the last 6 months since we last talked in February, the dates have essentially gone back by 6 months to closure and 12 months to completion. So while we have made progress, the forecast completion dates also gone back.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I thought that was going to be your explanation. I mean, I must admit, psychologically, I've been thinking as every month goes past since February that we're getting, closer to, 75, 80%. Anyway, I'll park that. So in your slides, Mike, you've said that the contractor's program to install works is significantly longer than was planned. So I guess I'm really wanting to understand what the key driver is around that. Why are they planning to take so much longer than what was the original plan? Are we confident that Fulton Hogan actually have the right plan? And is there anything that we can do about it?
Right.
Yeah, tough question, councillor. So, look, yeah, we don't. I mean, we don't fully understand the current plan, and we believe there is opportunity to recover part of that delay. It's certainly, as you pointed out, it's a lot longer than we expected when you look at the original program, yeah, it probably needs it will need attention now. So yeah, it's clearly disappointing to us, and it's an item that we will now focus on and will help the contractor with. I mean, based on my experience from overseas and that of my team from around New Zealand and the world, it does feel like a long prolongation of works. And we do believe there is the opportunity to mitigate some of that delay, but it'll really now depend on the contractor's capability and their willingness.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, so have we seen their plan?
Yes, we have seen their plan, and we are working with them on refining that plan to be more optimized. It just requires the contractor probably having a little bit more capability and willingness to come up with a slicker plan.
And what intervention could we take to actually increase their willingness to look at a different plan?
Yeah, so we're looking, councillor, at different options. I mean, there are some engineering opportunities we're looking at, some risk mitigations we're looking at. I mean, we are looking at whether we can go to sort of a double shift, 24/7 sort of operation for a period of time. So there are a number of mitigations that we're currently exploring. And through that and more optimised planning, I believe that there is the opportunity to mitigate part of this delay. But as I say, it comes back to the contractor's capability and willingness, really.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mike.
Councillor Dowler.
The valve that's coming from Germany, how long do you think it might take freight-wise? Just, I'm building a house, I got a 5-metre piece of flashing turn up and had a bend in it with my aluminium windows. And when that flashing went up, I was able to get the building inspector out to have a look at the house. It's now 6 weeks. And that piece of aluminium, I was told this morning, still hasn't left Auckland. So hopefully you can manage it better, getting their valve here quick.
That might be the problem when it gets to the country.
Yeah, I appreciate the confidence, councillor. It's challenging. It is really challenging. And we're trying to line up air freight right now, but even air freight, getting a slot on air freight is difficult. Yeah, so we expect to have that valve in country by the end of August. But yeah, there's risk around it, right? I mean, I'm just grateful we aren't buying any jib.
I've got a shed full of that.
Thank you, Councillor McNamara.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Where to start, Mike? I'll start first of all with the timeliness of your report, which for the past 3, 4, however many years we've been saying that delivering reports on the morning of or the night before is not really acceptable. Obviously you knew we had to, I presume you knew we had to set our annual plan this morning, and you're announcing another blowout in that. So all these factors have to be considered. So I find it really disappointing that again we're receiving a report this morning of a potential another $10 million, which incidentally we received an email only 2 weeks ago that informed us there was no further cost blowouts that you knew of, apparently. So, and a no surprises policy. Maybe you'd like to address that.
Sure, Councillor. So I believe when we met in February, we highlighted that we were working on the residual risks, and we undertook to come back by the end of the financial year, which is sort of now. And the statement of intent, which will be submitted next week, will reflect that. In terms of how fresh this number is, we had our board meeting on Friday middle of the day sort of thing. So my board's known about it since Friday. And we then advised shareholders early this week on Tuesday. So the first time the irrigators knew about it was late last night. So you're getting this information within a few days of my board getting it. And we've worked this up in real time as we become aware of the information over the last few weeks.
It's just we're bound by statutory timeframes, which I'm sure you're aware of. So if you need to adjust your board meeting calendar to reflect that we need information by certain dates, then perhaps that's something you ought to look at. But moving on, you said something about recoverable costs, or you're looking to recover costs. Can you explain that a little more? Who we're recovering from? We're just saving money, or I didn't quite understand that.
I don't recall saying recover costs, and I apologise if I got that wrong. We talked about recovering time. So we're looking at bringing back time through a number of mitigations that we're exploring with the contractor.
Right. And I'm not sure 24 hours, 7 days a week, unless the management team are going to be on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to make decisions. I think knowing how things work is not potentially going to save us perhaps much time as we might think every time they come to a problem that needs a management decision sort of thing. But in terms of recovery, did we not have sunset clauses and things where we can actually recover money from the contractor for delayed completion?
So, Councillor, the contract does allow for liquidated damages. Is that your question?
Yes. So are we approaching that? No.
Well, yeah, we're very aware that the contract has that provision for it, but I really can't say much more in a public forum. It wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah, okay. I would have thought that the dates weren't hidden from the public. We knew we had completion dates and things that we're obviously going past.
You counsel a fair point, but yeah, please recognise that there's a contractual matter between the contractor and ourselves, and it is a sensitive matter, and it's not something we can talk about publicly at the moment.
Right, I understand. I'm just staggered that we could go out with a P95 price at $79 million, and yet we had no idea of the design or the cost of the mechanical and engineering work, which it seems to be quite a large sum and quite a delay involved with it. So I really don't quite know how to ask you, but it's more than 5% of the job total is involved in mechanical and engineering, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Just one further question for me, Mr. Chair. In your professional opinion, there is still a positive outlook on the fact that when we put the plug in, this dam is not going to, or this reservoir particularly, is not going to leak water.
Yes, so your question is, in my professional opinion, do I believe the dam's not going to leak? Is that your question?
Or the reservoir is going to actually fill up?
Yeah, so look, I mean, there's always going to be some leakage, like particularly like ambient groundwater through the abutments. I mean, it's happening right now. Even before we close up, we're seeing the groundwater come through. You know, the key part to preventing or minimising leakage, because you can't totally prevent it, of course, is the ground curtain. To give you some granularity on the ground curtain, which seals up the leakage, you know, beneath the dam, we had a budget of 5,000 metres. I think last time we talked, we spoke about 15 or 16. We're now in this number. We're now looking at closer to 18,000 metres of drilling. So there's a lot of drilling, a lot of grout going down to seal the subsurface. And every time they drill, they test the residual permeability in the subsurface, and if it doesn't meet the required low limit of permeability, they grout and then drill in between and go again, right? So you keep measuring, drilling in between until the residual permeability is low enough. And that's been overseen by our design engineers, DamWatch, who have done a really good job and put a lot of effort into it. And then from a governance perspective, we are asking for an independent peer review by an independent expert, and we're using a guy in the States to look at their results. And he apparently, and Kim may know better than me, is apparently the guy who wrote the textbook on grouting and knows a lot about it. So he's looking at the results and also making recommendations on the grouting. So we've got good dam engineers looking at it, and we've got an independent set of eyes in the US looking at it as well.
So just to clarify, so how far through the grouting process are we?
So we have finished the grouting along the plinth, the front edge of the dam. We've got a couple of spots to go back to, just where we've been interpreting the results, but otherwise it's done. And the attention now turns to grouting in front of the spillway.
Councillor Greening.
Thank you. Yeah, can I also just share my concern with the reports? Appreciate the board may have seen it on Friday, but I'm sure these things get drafted up much earlier than that. So line of sight would be useful, if not for staff, I imagine, as part of their planning process. So I'll just leave that comment there. Maybe the board may want to consider how they address this ongoing issue of keeping us informed. I've barely had time to read this report. I got notification of it at 8:49 this morning going into a council meeting. So rather hard for councillors to drill into it. But I did notice that having looked back at the 10 March full council meeting and that report, and I think the observation's already been made, it doesn't look like any progress has been made, because the progress update of that report was 70%. And I think in December earlier it was only at 68%. And now we're back at 70%, having committed another 10 million. So I was just wondering if you could just articulate succinctly what's going on when there appears to be no progress made. I know this has been explored a bit earlier, but just for the benefit of those who are listening in. That's my first question.
I think that was already covered in response to Councillor Mackenzie, but if you briefly want to cover it again, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. That's a very fair question. Sharp eyes as well. So I think the photos that I've just put up show we have made good progress, right? So since we last talked, the concrete face has been finished, the parapet wall's going up, the spillway's almost done. So clearly, with 150 people on site, they've made progress. To answer your question, it's the denominator going up with the numerator. So the reason it's sort of stayed around 70% is because of the projected length of construction has prolongated out based on the contractor's advice. So the denominator's got longer.
But the projects to deliver it I mean, there's nothing creeping into it apart from additional time. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. I might just, when I've got time, have a look more closely at that. The other thing was you've identified 195 plus risk. So I know last time we spoke, we had difficulties assessing that risk. Clearly it's now something 10 million plus. What's the thinking now? Has any thinking been given? Has any consideration been given to how much more risk there is in terms of estimated value of risk that's still sitting out there?
Yeah, so in that price, we have valued risks that we can see and know and understand. Stabilisation, drought, more foundation treatment, the normal sort of stuff you see in a project. It's the unknowns, as I called it, that we can't quantify. I mean, we can't quantify the litigation risk of disputes because we haven't seen the claim. Well, we don't know what we're up against, so we can't put a number against that.
Okay, well, just hold you there. I would have thought the board would have got an opinion that gives them the scope of potential litigation costs, surely.
So the board is aware of what litigation costs we might be in for, and we have budgeted in that number for some litigation costs, but it's very difficult to understand what litigation costs we have when we actually haven't seen the claim for the contractor. We don't know what we're arguing yet.
Well, they're disputing what's already been adjudicated, so it's been narrowed down to that, hasn't it?
No, there's many items being disputed.
So more than the adjudication has been disputed.
Yes, correct.
So how much is being disputed?
So there's a number of items that the contractor is disputing. So they are disputing decisions of the independent engineer. So that, as you may recall, we have an independent engineer, a referee, if you like, who makes decisions on the contract. And the contractor, as I said last time, is disputing some of those decisions through arbitration.
So what's the value if they were successful? What would be the potential risk value of that if they were successful?
I'm not sure that we can go there in an open meeting.
But the board are aware of that.
Yeah, so the board and myself are aware of the matters that are being disputed by the contractor, but we really can't go into any more depth in a public forum. Sorry, Councillor.
Yep. So I would like to find out exactly what our risk exposure is, given this appears to be the most dominant part of the outstanding risk, unless you want to inform me there's other risks that you are also taking into account.
Yes, yeah. Councillor, there are other risks. That's on that slide in front of you. Being further COVID. COVID-related delays, excessive weather, particularly floods as we go to close, is another item we've signalled for a while. I mean, we can forecast and plan on sort of reasonable weather events and have some allowance, but if we get some unforeseen floods at the wrong time, that would be a further cost. And delays. We have a plan right now to bring those valves out of Germany. As a councillor Dowler said, if they don't arrive, that would be a further risk.
So have you forecasted these costs?
So we have forecast the cost of getting the kit and the valves out of Germany, air freight, and we're told that they will be here in time. We have a bit of float around that. But if there is a dramatic change that no one is expecting, that could potentially be a further cost.
Yeah, so you're obviously risk managing this, and obviously you put some value against what the worst case could be on a risk basis. So I'm just trying to get a feel here for whether you know or you've considered what you know to be the value of that outstanding risk, i.e. 195 million plus risk. We'll park the litigation risk to the side and maybe we want to talk confidentially, but I'm just trying to get a sense that you are forecasting the risk and know what the value of the potential risks will be, or are we just continually in the dark and we just roll with what happens, which doesn't seem very project manager orientated.
So councillor, I mean, we have forecast in the $195 million, the risks that we can foresee and may reasonably expect to get, like further delays with equipment arriving. It's sort of the exceptional risk thereafter we haven't, but I really can't go into a whole lot more detail without providing information I'd rather not provide to the contractor.
Okay. Mr. Chair, are we able to go into committee to find out what these risks are?
Not at this time, because we've used our 30 minutes for this presentation and there's still a number of people wanting to ask questions. So I'll move on now to Councillor Tufton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very simply, when we talk about completion date, is that, and then the start filling, I take it they're two separate dates, correct? I'm just trying to imagine when we say completion, is that the point at which we can actually start expecting the dam to fill, or is there a previous date? It's just, look, what I'm trying to get clarify in my mind a wee bit is because we know it's going into the dry season, and just try to picture actually in my mind as to when we might actually be able to use the water from the dam. And look, I know it's awkward to answer, but I just wondered if you could give me an indicator.
Yep, certainly. I can't seem to drive backwards with this. Is it? So, yep, keep going. One more. Yeah, so councillor, this may help explain my answer to your question. So there's a couple of blue diamonds at the bottom there. So the first diamond is when we essentially close the reservoir up and divert the river. And that is the point where we're starting to build the reservoir up, and we can then provide service, albeit through a plastic pipe, a temporary plastic pipe. So in terms of when we can start providing service to our shareholders, it will be soon after that first blue diamond. And then as we're filling the reservoir and providing service to the shareholders, we will be putting all the pipe work and the valves in place, and then at some point switch over to the permanent works. But effectively, we provide service and start filling the reservoir from that first diamond.
Thank you. So there is a sort of a transition as we go through.
Yep.
Thank you.
So that brings us to the end of the time, but if you've got a succinct question, I'll allow it, Councillor Turley and McNamara.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. One, the grouting is around the dam. My concerns are about the permeability of the reservoir floor, because it was always known that prior to building the dam, that if they dug holes, the water just kept disappearing. And then we were advised that the debritus that was left in the floor of the dam would help to alleviate that. So are there any tests being done on the permeability of the floor of the reservoir? That would be my first question. And if not, wouldn't that be a wise decision to follow through on?
As a councillor, the grouting is a continuous permeability test. So the way the grouting is done, so that the greatest seepage will be at the front edge of the dam.
Yeah,
we got 50 metres ahead, and the water going underneath the dam, right? And that's why we have the grout curtain. So each time we drill a hole down 40 odd metres down, we're testing the permeability. And if the permeability is not low enough, we pump grout in, seal up what we can, and then we drill holes in between the previous holes to measure the permeability again. So the entire grouting, all that 18,000 metres of drilling, we're testing the permeability as we go.
Yeah, I was more concerned about the floor of the reservoir behind the dam, because, you know, the makeup of the rock and the nature of it was an issue that was brought to council prior to signing off. So that I just like you to be aware of that if you know, there were concerns in the community about that. And the other question is around when the plan was signed at funding, were you confident about the contractor's capability? I mean, they're a significant national company and they won't want to be suffering reputational damage, and yet you're saying that there is questions around their capability, and I know that will relate to the supply of or the delivery of machinery and things that's needed, but do they need to be calling on further workforce from their national supply? I mean, how long is this going to go on? Because every day is costing ratepayers a significant amount of money.
Yep, it is, and we understand and share that pain. Look, what I will say is I know the team on the ground are working very hard. I mean, you know, they're long days, long hours, long nights up there, and they are working hard.
I don't dispute that. It's more the capability. Are they able to get more workers in? There must have been something at sign-off that said, you know, I mean, with a project of this size, surely you would have safeguards in the delivery of the project within a certain time, or there would be, what do we call it, when, you know, repercussions for the company if they don't get things done within a certain time.
Councillor, as I alluded to before, yeah, there are mechanisms under the contract which I can't really talk about publicly, you know, the damages.
Need to go into confidential.
And I mean, the contractor, you know, does have some capabilities challenges. It is a pretty tough time right now to go find people, and I think that's been part of the challenge is finding more people to work on the structures and the mechanical works in a pretty tough environment. In fact, they're struggling to hold on to staff, and a lot of them seem to be disappearing off to Australia right now. So it is tough for them. Yeah, there is room for improvement, and we're working with a contractor to implement some of those improvements.
Councillor McNamara.
Thank you. Your excessive weather statement up there is under residual risks and costs. My understanding was the contractor bought flood events risk off of us. So I'm just wondering what that line refers to.
You're correct. Contractor carries flood risk, but we carry the cost of the time of any weather delays. This particularly pertains, councillor, to closure. I mean, closure is a very, very sensitive time. You know, we have people working in a culvert with water flowing past them, and we can really only do their work when it's dry. So if there's a prolonged period of wet weather where there's risk of flood, which would obviously harm people, we have to wait. And
Councillor Hill, and that'll be the last question.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, Mike, for your presentation. You know, very disappointing news, of course. Again, based on the anticipated time that the project is completed, and what would be a date that the final cost of the dam will be known, please?
That's a pretty tough question, Councillor Hill.
I understand that it's tough. We roll on from month to month and 6-month period to 6-month period, and you know, things are pushing out in terms of forecasted completion date. I understand that the dispute with the contractor, you know, if you leave that out of the equation, surely there's a date at which it will be known that we can say, actually, by then we'll know what the final cost is.
Yep. And councillor, in my experience, you don't know what the cost of the project is until after you've finished the project. You know, with respect to, I mean, there will be items to you know, fix up and repair at the end. There will be ongoing costs to resolve, the cost of some of the variations and changes, for example, and the cost of the disputes may not be known for 2 years.
So if you take out the cost of the disputes, and knowing you've got a anticipated completion date, then at this point, when would you anticipate that the final cost will be known?
I'd expect that we would have a pretty good understanding of the final costs in 2024.
Just sometime in 2024.
Yep.
And you couldn't narrow it down to a month, or it's a question though, isn't it? Because it rolls on and on and on. So we're going to go through the rest of this year, all of next year. We're going to hit 2024. We still won't know the actual cost. And at some point during that year, the final cost will be known. I just thought there might be something a bit more yeah, I thought there might be something that's more attached to the completion date.
I think considering the scale of the project and the amount of time that's involved, that perhaps if you could narrow it down to one half or the other of the year may be helpful, but I don't see you. I know it's a pretty tough question, Mike, so if you're happy to pass, that's fine by me.
I suppose my point is that we've got a date of it being completed by, and there are things that will need to be taken into account in terms of included in the final cost. And I thought there'd be something narrower than a whole 12-month period.
Yeah, I mean, councillor, we'll be looking to sort of lock down and conclude the cost as quickly as we can. And clearly, it'll be a funneling process where we're getting down to sort of the last part of the cost towards the end. But this is pretty normal in construction projects. I know some projects are finished 3 or 4 years ago and are still resolving the costs.
Yeah, well, it's good for me to know it's 2024, the very earliest, that we'll know whether we're still in the overrun business or not.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, David. I think I did have the pleasure of taking the mayor and deputy mayor with yourself, Mike, up to the dam. And I think the huge scale was overwhelming. And I think we have to appreciate this is a large project, and there hasn't been large dams built in New Zealand for some time. So some of these questions are going to be challenging at whatever time they're posed. But we do appreciate the work you're doing and continue to support you, although it may not sound like it with the questions around the table. Ultimately, we've got to get this thing finished one way or another. So really appreciate the work you're all doing on the board. Thank you. And with that, councillors, we can continue with the agenda, and I think we'll go to the first item, Streets for People. Jamie and Claire are here.
Just a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sorry?
Just a question. Several councillors were seeking to go into committee. Are we not going into committee to ask any questions of the dam company today?
The presentation was for 30 minutes. We went for 45. We've got quite a lot on today, so no, that'll have to be given consideration at a future date.
Isn't there a concern that we don't know the costs? I would have thought all the councillors would be very concerned, including yourself.
I'm not saying that they're not concerned, but it wasn't scheduled for today.
Well, can't we be impromptu and ask? They're just in the building.
Leave doing it. Yeah,
Thursday.
yeah. And that's what I was thinking. So on advice from the Mayor, Councillor Greening, is advised there'll be lots, well, some other opportunities for us to go into committee and discuss that matter
Today or at another time?
at another time. Yeah.
Today or next week.
Yeah.
It's not gonna make any difference. Ask any plan. Whether we get it today or next week isn't going to make any difference to any decision that we're going to make in the immediate future. So I think scheduling an opportunity for the dam company to come and speak in committee so that those questions around liquidated damages, costs, forecasts can be asked and answered is appropriate. And so my commitment will be to work with council staff to find the earliest possible opportunity for that to happen.
Leonie, you've heard that, so you'll work towards that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, too. We also want to consider there's a lot of unknowns here. So I think that it is prudent to put this off for a future discussion because I think there's an awful lot of unknowns around the costings. So we agree that it should go into a future confidential session so that we can get
Thank
Mike
you.
back.
So we will leave that and move to the agenda items, and we'll start at 9.2. Jamie and Claire, good morning and welcome. And Streets for People Councillors project, and it starts on page 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, councillors. I'm happy to take the report as read and answer questions, but first, I just noted that there's a slight discrepancy in the resolution 4, the order of priorities. Unfortunately, I have transposed Wakefield and Brightwater when compared with the body of the report, item 4.10. So my apologies for that. And in the draft resolution, I'd just like the Wakefield and Brightwater to be transposed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
My apologies. So yeah,
so it's going to be Wakefield ahead of Brightwater. Is that what you're saying? If there was an order.
correct. Yeah, that was our intended sort of draft priorities. So feel free to reverse that if you'd like, but it might be good if I just hold there and answer any questions.
All right. Do we have any questions for the staff in relation to this report? It is a pretty extensive report. Yes. Councillor McNamara.
I do. So if we buy into this program, it's we then have to submit to the government's agenda or direction in terms of how our voting complies, how we spend our money. Yes.
Maybe the best way through you, Mr. Chair, to answer that is all waka kotahi or government funding comes with, I guess, constraints on how that money is used. The great thing for our council at the moment is that this funding aligns very well with the strategic work that this council has done through the Richmond Transport Program business case, the walking and cycling strategy, our long-term plan. And for this council, it's more an opportunity to advance that work than to submit to, I guess, others' agendas. This is in line with the council's agenda.
Through the chair, So we've reshaped our priorities according to government direction in the past. That's why we kind of fit so well, I think. But once we sign up to this, our governance over that direction is diminished, from my understanding.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think the way I would answer that is a little bit reflecting what Jamie just said, in that this isn't about necessarily aligning with the government's agenda. While we have been aligning, I mean, from several years ago with the change in the GPS and land transport, we've started looking at things differently. But everything that the Streets for People program would be funding, with the 90% FAR from Waka Kotahi, everything that's funding are things that this council have already endorsed. So it's really just providing a really high degree of funding for things that we've already approved.
So that is the current timeframe. This moving forwards, I'm aware of what happened with Three Waters, for example, where we got given incentives and things to get involved and be a part of it and share information. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves out of assets. So the government is also working to take control of our regulatory, our town planning and all that through the RMA reform. And this, to me, smacks of the first step in being involved in a process where we lose a significant amount of our autonomy over our roading and footpath decisions. And if I look at the goals of this organisation, I've just lost them, but reshaping streets to expand low carbon transport choices, council who understand broad community connections, strong treaty partnerships, and creative collaboration will deliver great outcomes. If you read through the rest of it, we're going down a path of race-based health and things like that. And now this looks like a potentially a race-based roading program. I struggle to support. Have you read the item? I mean, we got it last night, so I would understand if councillors hadn't actually read it. But it's just the first step in a stage of losing our autonomy and losing governance. So does it end with this like one set of projects, or is this an ongoing thing?
Clear.
Oh, I could comment. Oh, Richard.
Sure, through the chair.
Yeah.
I would just repeat what I already just said in response to that, and that this is funding for things that council has already approved. This isn't really taking us down a new track. This is just funding something that we've already got and already aligns with council's priorities. So I don't think, I guess I'm just not quite sure what you're asking, to be honest. I think we've already been through this, and this is funding those things.
Can I reassure the council or the committee that this is not about in Waka Kotahi taking over any of our assets? They have identified that Streets for People is an area that it needs to be addressed. And so they've incentivised councils to invest in it by giving them a great level of financial assistance than previously. It's not about taking over assets. So I think that's basically it, isn't it? Jamie, you can confirm that?
Yeah. Look, in my time involved in roads, this is probably one of the best opportunities I've seen where the stars are aligning and where our biggest issue in terms of investing in our transport system to make it fit for purpose and meet the needs of our modern towns and urban environments has been the lack of funding. It's driven a lot of the stretching out of things. So, everything from new footpaths to traffic calming it's going to take us a long time to deliver our vision of what we've agreed to deliver. But things like this are just amazing opportunities to get that done sooner, and that's what Waka Kotahi are trying to incentivise with this. There's some real concern nationally that our country is not delivering fast enough to make change, and a lot of that is because the councils have been telling Waka Kotahi and the government, we can't afford to do this, and this is the response. Okay, if you guys want to do this, we'll give you more money to do it, and that's kind of what we're presenting today.
I guess the question, Mr. Chair, isn't being addressed is, does this lock us into a future path, or is this just a specific short-term goal?
Okay, thank you, and through the chair, I think I get what you're saying. This doesn't lock the council into changing its own investment decisions in the future, through a future long-term plan. There's no hidden strings with this. If we're in the Streets for People program, we get an agreed amount of money through to June 2024, and when that ends, I guess we'll wait and see what a future iteration might be. So there's no hooks as far as we can see.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add to that? Probably the only thing that locks us into is probably a little bit more maintenance work in the future with this investment that's gone in. That's probably the only thing I could comment about in terms of what we've been locked into.
Councillor Turley.
I'm happy to support this. I think it's a great opportunity to get some action out there, and the community has been supportive of it. So I have to go. So
Thank you. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, I'm happy to move this. I think this is a great opportunity for Tasman District Council, and we really need to have more variety and options for people to appreciate their urban areas and enjoy them. So in relation to number 2 on the resolution, I think the focus is on urban areas, and so whether or not a Golden Bay councillor needs to be on that group or not, because we have actually had an Innovating Streets project, but I would like to put forward that Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Tufnell and Councillor Dowler be on that Streets for People panel, and if there's another one who would be available other than a Golden Bay member, then that could go in there. Otherwise, if not, then I'm happy to go on to that panel.
Those suggested names were on a ward basis, but
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah. But I think it's just concentrating on urban areas. Would that be right? That's right, Jamie. Yeah.
So you're leaving your own name in or not?
Well, yeah, I'm happy to do that unless someone else is interested.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything further? Thank you. Councillor Greening.
Thank you. Just want to get clarity around the funding. Jamie, I think you've articulated pretty well, but I take it that there is the potential for savings from us then. If they're funding 90% of what we've already agreed, there is effectively some savings out of this that we wouldn't have to fund ourselves.
Jamie.
Through Mr. Chair, so they want, a key theme that what Waka Kotahi want through this is acceleration of programs. So if we were substituting other LTP work that was funded at 51% with this work, which is funded at 90%, we might not satisfy Waka Kotahi, or they might think that we're gaming the system, and that might restrict our future opportunities to take part in other similar programs. So what we're recommending is to retain the existing funding that we've got for these programs, which is already in the long-term plan, and add this in, and that'll really enable more work to happen. And that's the theme. That's what's Waka Kotahi are wanting to see.
So I'm just trying to get an idea of scope here. So are you suggesting that this could be bigger than what we've already planned for? Or are you trying to accelerate what we're trying to plan for? Because it sounds like it's expanding what we're doing rather than just doing it faster.
Yeah, so what we've got in our long-term plan at the moment is these improvements, like things like cycle lanes, things like neighbourhood traffic calming, raised pedestrian platforms. We've got those spread out over a long period of time. And what we want this program to do is bring some of that forward. So we're making our streets safer sooner, and we're able to deliver the changes to our travel habits and the resulting emissions, and also the livability and safety in our urban areas. So we want to do everything we're hearing is that needs to be done sooner. So we're not expanding the size of what we're planning to do. We're still planning to do the same work, but we can front load potentially multiple millions of that rather than spreading it out over 10 years.
So does that mean that we would make savings in 30 years out because we've brought it forward and it's been funded for?
I think the opportunity might be there, in future long-term plans, if we've delivered on a lot of our needs and the work that we want to do. If we come to future long-term plans and we say, okay, we've done that, we no longer need to have that budget in 2030 or 2032. That's a real opportunity.
Yeah. So that's a potential saving. What I don't want to see though is scope creep, where suddenly we're buying land to build a cycleway when we never intended to do that. So it's got to remain in the same scope of what we're doing. There's no scope creep, if I can put it that way.
Through the chair, I think it's important to point out that the Streets for People funding that we're talking about here doesn't include any additional projects that we haven't already talked about. There's no, this is about funding what we've already got. There aren't any, there's not sort of side projects that we may potentially be bringing in necessarily that we haven't already discussed with this funding. This is simply, as Jamie said, being able to make these changes that we know we need to make faster instead of waiting maybe 5, 6, 7 years to be able to put in a pedestrian crossing, things like that.
And sorry, just to add, picking up what the councillor said, there's certainly no plans to gold plate anything that we're doing. We're quite accustomed to right sizing all of our projects. So hopefully that I can reassure you that that's the plan.
Thanks, Jamie. That's very reassuring.
Thank you. We haven't got a seconder for the resolution. Councillor Dowell is happy. You don't want to speak. Councillor McKenzie, you're next.
Oh, thank you. I was going to second it, but you don't need that now. So, I think that through the walking and cycling strategy, we heard that actually the public are very supportive of that, and it has been hailed as actually a great strategy. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity to be able to implement some of those programs of work. So I'm very supportive of it. I guess my question though is, we know that we're going to need to do a emissions reduction plan by the end of 2022. So I'm assuming that actually some of the actions that might be taken to deliver on the Streets for People project would be good ones that we would actually reflect in our emissions reduction plan. Am I right on that?
Through Mr. Chair, spot on. yeah, this totally aligns with delivering on the targets that have already been set in the walking and cycling strategy. You know, they are ambitious targets, and that was acknowledged at the time. But this program could certainly help us achieve that, even though the emissions reduction plan itself will set those targets for our region. There's still some work to do specifically on that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm supportive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ogilvie.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'd like to suggest Councillor Walker being on that panel as well. I mean, she was on the walking and cycling strategy, and she's very active in Motueka in terms of the neighbourhood streets program that Paul Johnson runs. So she's got, you know, feet in that camp quite definitely, and she ought to be on that panel. I mean, I see that quite strongly. Secondly, how will this relate to the Nelson Tasman Land Development Manual, though, Jamie, you haven't mentioned that in your report at all?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, the Land Development Manual is just one of those, I guess, underlying standards that apply to projects in the roads. That is a standalone thing, and in fact, what we're finding is some of these initiatives in new standards that are being developed. So there's a new Aotearoa, what's the urban design guide that's just been released, and so there's a number of standards being developed that are beginning to, I guess, supersede older standards, even though the Land Development Manual is not old. There's probably a need to review it in light of some fairly rapid changes around how our streets are supposed to look and feel. But I will say that our LDM, there's not a misalignment with this. It's already the upfront introductory sections, which are supposed to tell designers the way they should be designing the streets, is already largely focused on good walking and cycling routes and urban amenity, much more than the old engineering standards were. So I'd say there's a pretty good alignment, but it could be better.
Right. And while I support the proposal in the resolution, Mr. Chair, my question, I suppose, relates to any delays in terms of our own long-term plan and annual plan programs, because we've got a pretty demanding program for walking and cycling in the next year, at least, and beyond that. So I don't want to see this sort of panel holding up any of the actual projects which we've got in mind for 2022, 23 and 23, 24. So that's the other, I suppose, question or concern, that we must proceed with our own project programming and planning, and at the same time doing the strategy if that's going to happen.
Any comment, Jamie?
No, I agree totally. You know, this we want all of the stars to align. We want all of these projects to run seamlessly together, and that's certainly the intent of the project team. And the pleasing thing about the Streets for People program is it is being done fairly rapidly, and the timeframes have been quite constrained, and that's a good sign for us. Everyone wants to get on and get things done.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
There appears to be no further speakers. Does the mover want to write a reply?
Just in relation to the members of the panel, would Councillor Walker like to sit on the panel instead of myself?
Yeah, that might be an option, I guess. Yeah.
But we haven't. Councillor Walker.
Councillor Walker, have you got any comment or thought?
I'm happy to sit on the panel, but I guess it's up to you, Chair, to work out, do you need a Golden Bay representative on there?
I understand, Jamie, do you see the ward-based as an issue or not necessarily?
My advice on that would be, yeah, it's still uncertain exactly which projects we deliver, but it's highly likely that the projects will be focused in the Richmond, Motueka, Waimea area, more so than Golden Bay. So my advice would be it would be a higher priority to have a much more Motueka representation than Golden Bay representation.
So you're happy to amend the resolution, councillor Butler?
Yes, I am.
Councillor Dowler is the seconder. Are you happy with that? Okay. So that's noted. So it was moved by councillor Butler and seconded by councillor Dowler, with the names now folded on the screen. And all of the other parts, we've got Wakefoot ahead of Brightwater, is where it should be. Yeah. So I'll put the resolution. All those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against. Resolution is carried. Thank you. And councillor McNamara has asked for his vote against to be recorded. Thank you. So then we'll move on to the Treasury report. Mike or Matt or James?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Councillors.
We have James is the author of the report and is online if there are questions that he can answer. So yeah, Treasury report. It's a quarterly report that the council, the operations committee gets. First thing to point out, unfortunately, is a couple of errors. In paragraph 1.4, we talk about being compliant with all the Treasury policies. And then in 1.5 and 1.6, we tell you that we're not. So that's one thing to note. The other thing in paragraph 3.1, at the bottom of the table, we talk about a possible limit on the liquidity of 273 million. Unfortunately, there was an error in that as well, and it's more like 325 million. This is in line with the debt cap over and above the 250 million in the LTP, where we're talking about 95 million. So that's much more in line with that. So apologies for those errors. I suppose I'm happy to open it up for questions.
Thank you. Just in relation to the one you talked about at 3.1, does that, so what would that 273 million figure change to?
Through you, Mr. Chair, about 325 million.
Right. So that, at the top, it's got possible limit, and alongside it's got total debt. So I'm a little confused. Which is it? At the top, it's got on the table, it's got possible limit, and at the bottom, alongside 273, which you're now saying is 320, is total debt. So now I'm getting it. So 323 is the possible limit of our total debt. Is that how you should read it?
325.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And just in relation to the one about the Westpac Bank, I think it is, and we've borrowed more than our limit. How did that come about, or why was that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I'm not the mayor yet.
Not the mayor. Essentially, it was a decision that we knowingly took. The Westpac Bank were offering the best rates, and while we breached the policy, it was saving us more money than if we went to one of our other potential counterparties. So that was the reason for the decision. I think we're due to come back with an update of the Treasury policy as a precursor to the start of the next LTP. What we'll be recommending in that is that we actually look at those counterparty limits, and perhaps rather than having absolute limits, we talk about percentages to give us more leeway. Obviously, as our debt cap increased from 200 million to 250 million, we probably should be looking at our counterparties as well. So that will come back to council in due course.
Thank you. James, you have your hand up. I'm not sure if you want to add something.
Through the chair, just to clarify, when we're talking about the counterparty risk, that isn't actually us borrowing money from Westpac, that's actually us investing them. It was a big $25 million term deposit.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Do we have a resolution in relation to that? Yes, we do. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Dowler, seconded Councillor Tufnell. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And now Matt and Mike might as well stay there. We'll move to the financial update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, this is a quarterly report that comes through to council. The highlights, I suppose, of this is that we are ahead of the budget. We were budgeting for a deficit. That deficit is not going to be as significant as we were expecting. So that's a favourable result. And a lot of that is around our forestry operations doing better than we planned. We also have some other drivers that are mentioned there. There is an offset in terms of some areas spending more, for example, in resource consents and building consents. While we've increased the revenue to well over the budgeted levels, there is a corresponding increase to costs. So I suppose it's a continuation of the story that you've probably been seeing for the last 6 months as these reports have been flowing through. One thing to point out is just around the capital budget. At the end of April, we'd spent $47.3 million. So that's already more than this council's ever spent, I would imagine, ever, but certainly in the last 7 or 8 years that I've been involved with the council, I think that was 45 million. So with 2 months to go, we're looking on track to spend 60 odd million, early 60s potentially, against a budget of 71 million. So the historic carryovers that have been coming back have been more on the line of 25 million, 20 to 25 million. So that will obviously be much smaller, and obviously is what council, etc., were expecting or wanting, to see more of those funds spent. That carryover of circa 10 million, if it is around that, would get our 22-23 capital spend up to about 65 million. And given we're going to be spending close to that this year, it just feels like it's much more in line with what we would expect. Short of that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor McNamara.
Happy to move the report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
The forestry above budget, is that production or is that revenue for sale of?
So net revenue from forestry is up, Mr. Chair. There are two drivers. One is log prices being above what we anticipated they would be in the budget. The other is actually the volume of the harvesting is ahead of what we anticipated in the budget. Less harvesting happens in the last 2 months of the year than happens in the earlier part of the year, but we're still expecting to end the year with an additional profit over budget within the forestry activity.
And how much money has the forestry, how much revenue has been put aside to pay the first tranche of the allocated Waimea Dam funding?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I haven't set aside a specified amount for that. We are currently holding surplus funds within the forestry activity, and that will be a conversation with council. How much is set aside to potentially repay debt in relation to the Waimea Community Dam will also be influenced by decisions around the Three Waters reforms.
Through the chair. So we had, I think, $5 million that was due in 3 years.
Yes, we've got the funding was spread over 20 years. Council resolved to refinance the first instalment of the $10 million environmental loan from CIIL by additional borrowing through the LGFA. Pending the outcome of the Three Waters reform.
I'm just specifically referring to what was passed, that forestry funding would be allocated to repay the Healthy Rivers or whatever it was component. And I'd just like to know how much money is put aside and when that date is due.
Through Mr. Chair, I'd have to check the due date for the payment under the $10 million loan. I don't have it to hand. However, we haven't specifically put funds away in a specified reserve to make those repayments. We have simply held them as part of the forestry activity balance.
It's just our reading in the agenda where we're allocating forestry funds for other things constantly. And if we get to that date and that money is not there, either because log prices drop and we've already harvested more than we thought we were going to have harvested and the money isn't there, that money is going to have to be raised in other ways. And that's not what was passed. So I'm not sure how we keep a track of that, but it needs to be done.
So that's a comment / question, I take it. I'll go to Mike. Hopefully he can answer it.
Through Mr. Chair, when council resolved to use some of the income in forestry to cover interest costs on Waimea Community Dam loans, at the time I reviewed the balance within the account and I was satisfied that there would be sufficient funds to meet our obligations to repay debt.
Thank you. I follow on, Chris. Had you finished? Close enough.
I just want to know, are we going to get reporting at some point that keeps a track of the funds in the account and the funds required at dates? Because otherwise it will slip aside and we will have a nasty surprise.
Mike.
I will make that reporting available to the commercial committee who has oversight of the forestry activity.
So yeah, I'll just follow on before I come to you, Councillor Mackenzie. Just in relation to the forestry, and we've quite ahead of budget, but a lot of that would be, from my perception, is that from Ball Ace Forest where we had some wind throw and we've harvested quite a bit earlier than would have perhaps been scheduled. So further out, does that alter our likely income? Have we taken it early? And it'll be a challenge later on. I think it's what Councillor McNamara is also referring to, just that we need to be sure we've got to have the money at the times we need them.
Through Mr. Chair, I'm well aware of the impact of the harvesting program, and that's why I'm usually reluctant to suggest to councillors they use the forestry money to fund other activities. We do have a hole in the forestry harvesting income. We're currently working our way through the peak of the harvesting cycle. In about 4 years' time or thereabouts, we'll start to go into what's a significant period where we have relatively low income from harvesting before that income picks up again. So it's part of the activity management plan, and it's part of the work we'll do leading into the LTP to ensure we have sufficient funds to meet our obligations to CIIL. But also, once again, I'll draw council's attention that until we know the outcome of the Three Waters reform, we won't know whether we'll need those funds or whether that debt will pass to a Three Waters entity.
So in effect, we'll have a bit of a smoothing up going on through our own retaining those funds in an account.
And that is correct. That's the reason they're being held in the forestry activity account. So you might say, well, there's a big surplus sitting in that account. It's because we need to smooth the drawdowns, smooth the availability of funds.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm happy to second the report if you don't have a seconder for it. My question, though, is just picking up on a comment I made earlier in this meeting today with respect to the carry forwards. I would like to be able to have a discussion about the carry forwards as soon as we are able to, following year end. I'm not sure whether it's the normal practice, Mike, to wait for the fully audited results before we do that, but given that we've got, potential delays in terms of the audit, I'd like to be able to have a discussion based on the interim results. So is that possible?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, the conversation always occurs based on the interim results. We don't wait until a fully audited account's out. It's when we've closed off and we have satisfied ourselves that there'll be no movements or no material movements in the balances. I would bring to the councillors' attention that many of the surplus activity balances were programmed during the first 3 to 4 years of the long-term plan to be used to offset effectively rates. And so some of those activity balances that have been carried forward have actually been identified as being required to meet the LTP income levels in future years.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? So it's been moved. Councillor McNamara, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. If there's no further discussion, I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, resolution is carried. Thank you. Susan, do you think we can got time to do the customer services now before the lunch break? Yeah, right. Hopefully.
Community infrastructure, they don't take 5 minutes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. So welcome, team. Good to see you all. Susan, I believe you've got an introduction to do, or two.
I do have a couple of introductions to do. There'll be 2 new faces that you'll see in front of you. One of them is Janet Lee Van Dyke, and Janet is the new Customer Services Manager. Janet's been here just over 2 months now, or just on 2 months, just coming up to 2 months now. Yeah, and the other one is Beata, and Beata is our Welcome and Communities person. And as you're aware, that role is funded through external funding from central government. So yeah, she's here in a new role, and she was just going to, if we've got time, to do a quick presentation with about half a dozen slides to just talk you through what her role is going to be and what she's doing if we've got time. So yeah.
Welcome, ladies, and welcome to the whole team. Hope you enjoy your time here.
And we can take the report as read. I don't think there's any additional updates, but if you've got any questions, we're happy to take them.
Do you want to work for it by section as we normally do?
Yes, it would be good to.
I'm just having trouble with my iPad. It wants to keep dying. So could you just, where we're going to start in the page number, please?
Okay.
Customer services on page.
Page 53.
54.
54, and you're going to start with the customer services update?
That would be good, thank you. Yes.
Janet, you're happy to take the report as read?
Yes.
Any questions? Councillor Dowler.
Yeah, I placed a phone call through. I wanted to talk to a staff member a few weeks ago, and a lovely lady answered the phone. She's very polite and that, and then she says, "Oh, I will put it through as a customer service request." And I went, "Oh, okay, that's new." I just wanted to talk to the staff member. I had an issue from a ratepayer that I needed to talk to pretty well straight away. So I had a discussion. I think the customer service request was put through, but I was over here the next day, so I went and saw the staff member personally. And he did say that, but I just found it was very unusual. It was like a semi-blockage, if you can understand. I needed to talk to the staff member about the problem immediately, not later.
That's the problem. I know exactly what's going on here. Janet.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Could have been that a staff member wasn't available, or that it was a new team member. I suppose we've got lots of new staff in the customer service centre, but they do put people through normally where the people are showing as present. So yeah.
Councillor Butler.
Yeah, thank you for the report. I'm just following on. I mean, mine is the same topic really, is that the customer service requests are really quite crucial, to the workings of council and the community. And so can we have confidence that customer service requests are going to go through to the right staff member? Because sometimes, it may go to somebody who's on leave, or and then there's no action, or it's just we need to have the confidence that the system is actually going to get through to the relevant staff member. Yeah.
Janet.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So where possible, we use if departments have an admin box, we'll send it through to there in case there's other people not present. Otherwise, yeah, it will go through hopefully through to the right person. Yeah. Yeah. We have got training going on at the moment for the 6 new staff. So yeah.
Can we be confident that the staff member who receives the customer service request knows where to send the request, or if they don't know which direction to send it in, then will they get advice about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, they will get advice on where to send it. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I just add to that, Mr. Chair? At the other end of they get referred to, particularly in the community infrastructure group, they get referred to the various admin officers and they allocate them to the staff. And every week our managers go through all the customer service requests, see which ones are outstanding, and we make sure they're all covered off. So, we within the community infrastructure, we keep a close eye on the customer service requests. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just further to Councillor Dowler, conversation, that's been my experience too. And I've been able to drill down on that over the phone, and I've established that it actually is the new staff members. And just wondering if our staff in the leadership team area could just perhaps highlight who we are as councillors. Because it is incredibly frustrating when you can't get through to a staff member. And it's not because the staff member's not there or they don't want to speak to you, it's because there is this blockage in the phone and the service request isn't really what we're looking for, because we're able to do those ourselves online. Thank you.
Susan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The staff should be aware. We've got a huge big poster downstairs in the customer services area with all your names and photographs on. So hopefully they should be aware. But we'll make sure that we raise this at the next team meeting and make sure that it's dealt with. Thank you.
Because maybe a matter of relating the caller number, because you can identify the caller number too as well, can't you?
Sometimes some people block the caller number.
Can I just say we do have that blockage system in place for a simple reason, is that we try and coordinate the calls coming in, responding to them, because staff obviously need to get things done, and if they're interrupted by phone calls all the time, it just creates more churn. So we do make sure that if it's just the general public come in, it's not urgent, and they do fill out a customer service request, and we normally deal with it within the 24 hours. Yeah.
Councillor Greening.
Hello. Interested in what our average wait times have been and what the general trajectory of our wait times are.
Susan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We don't know that off the top of our head, but we can get that information out to you.
That'd be useful. Just be interesting to see how we're tracking against national benchmarks, I suppose, and whether we're properly resourced or not fully resourced or other issues around that. Also interested just generally, do we are the team organised into channels, comm channels, or they broadly answer all channels like chat, email, call?
Through you, Mr. Chair. They're organised in channels, so there's a roster of people working on they're either on the inbox or calls or certain lines. So yeah, through channels.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just the question in relation to the report from myself, just in relation to 4.4, where the library and Tākega libraries came through Richmond, what was the reason behind that? It seemed a little bit of a strange thing to do, the amount of calls that you get here in Richmond.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the customer services centre here in Richmond is the call centre. It operates and it covers the whole district, and it also covers the libraries. In the past, we've just had a new phone system put in and in the past people were able to phone directly into the Takaka Library and Service Centre if they knew that number, or they would come through to the switchboard here. But with the new phone system, there isn't now the ability for people to call the libraries directly. So they come through here. And if they do, sometimes the request can be dealt with here, like the customer services staff can renew books online. They can do all sorts of things online for the libraries to save putting the calls through to the libraries. But if the person does need to go through to the library, we can pop them through.
Okay, thank you. And then just in relation to the comment that Councillor Greening's just made in relation to wait times, I'd have to say when I do call through the counter, it's actually pretty good compared to a lot of other businesses currently. I called an entity that we deal with yesterday and it normally has good response times, but they did apologise for the long wait because of COVID affected staff and it was quite a long wait. It's certainly nowhere near what I've waited through. Normally we respond pretty quickly. So
yes, through you, our response times are generally pretty quick.
Yeah.
Like everybody, we have had times when we have had low numbers due to COVID and we have been impacted. So I think that the trend recently will show that our wait times might be slightly longer than they have been in previous years, but we are still pretty prompt at responding to calls.
right.
Yeah.
And then my final last question is a little more complex. Just in relation to calls, and particularly in response to the planning area where they have quite a delay in responding. And I see through the service request that I monitor that there's quite a lot of calls come where people want an urgent response or response in relation to a property sale, because like we know that our planners are taking up to 2 months to respond. Are those calls where people actually ask for a more prompt response responded to by someone? Yeah, it may well be a question that you may need to talk to Tanya about, but it does concern me.
Yes, yeah, we would have to go back to Tanya and find out what the process is from that group.
Councillor McNamara, you were indicating.
Yeah, thank you. Just in terms of what you said about the main call centre taking and renewing library books and doing library work, I would find that rather bizarre given the priority of calls coming through here compared to the work being done in a library, which when I've been in there, they don't appear to be especially inundated with customers. So if they have to file books a bit later or it takes them a bit longer to get to book filing or whatever compared to questions around consents and all the rest of it, I just think that's a little bit odd to me.
Susan?
Thank you. We've been doing this for about 3-4 years now, where the call centre here has been taking all the library calls as well. But what I would say that if they were getting really tight in terms of timeframes and wait times were getting up there a little bit, they would put calls like that through to the library to get them to the library staff to deal with them. The difficulty that library staff have, of course, is that they're sort of trying to deal with customers out in the front counter as well. And so what we found, one of the reasons why the call centre took over the responsibility for the library phones was that there was a long wait once we put them through to the library, because people were dealing with the customer often at the counter and they couldn't just drop that customer to answer the phone. So the phones were ringing and ringing and ringing and ringing for quite a long time once they got to the library because the staff have been busy. So so we are getting a better customer service for the library customers as well, as well as still maintaining our wait times for the call centre here. So we haven't noticed a reduction in service in any way in the time that we've been doing the library calls.
Thank you. We'll move to community partnerships. I guess you're here for that, Yulia. So welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to take the report as read.
Do we have any questions in relation to that? I know you read that Councillor Mackenzie and I were at Tapawera Community Council meeting on Tuesday night, and the COVID grants were really well received. So thanks to Lani for that. Councillor Ogilvie.
I'm not quite sure whether this is the appropriate spot to ask the question, but I'm looking out the window at the Matariki flags. Are they council funded flags or are they from Richmond Unlimited?
I'm sure Yulia might be able to answer that. I did hear her on the radio this morning or yesterday promoting the whole event. And
We are
it's really
having-
well, I must say.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we're having an event tonight, and I'm obviously inviting everyone at 5 p.m. on Sandal Square. But I'm not sure who's paying for those flags. I know that Richmond Unlimited is putting them up, so they're paying for installing them up and down. But I don't know who bought them. It probably would just their funding. Yeah.
It looks good, Mr. Chair. I just want to add that, of course, yes.
And
Well,
I
impressive,
understand
actually.
the community is actually looking forward to some events because it's
Yeah,
been
there's
such a long time.
the great excitement about Matariki. It's quite interesting. We've got our own New Zealand holiday, which is interesting in itself, isn't it?
So do we want to go, any questions? Do we want to go to the presentation now, Susan, or to Chris? Who do?
Well, while we're on community partnerships, if it's okay, we'll just continue on with Beata's presentation. She's got it down to 5 minutes, so it should be right.
Do you want to speak to it?
Kia ora koutou katoa. My name is Beata. Hello. Thank you very much for letting me speak and giving you a wee insight into the program. It is actually funded by Immigration New Zealand. The nutshell version is that it is a settlement program supporting our local governments and the communities to collaboratively create welcoming and inclusive environments. So it's based on Te Tirotiro Waitangi, Mana Whenua, critical collaborators in the project. The values underneath the program are manakitanga and whanaungatanga. And just to give you some idea, this is not just in New Zealand. It was started basically internationally in 2012. New Zealand was one of the founding members. There are more than 250 welcoming communities worldwide. In 2017, we had 5 pilot projects in New Zealand. They were successful. It's 18 communities all over Aotearoa now. And there will be 8 further ones in July. It's very popular in communities. It has been very successful. So why do we need this program? You in your work relate a lot to the future and what we need. We have uncertain times, but just some numbers for you. Our medium growth scenario for this district is 8,000 people in the next 10 years. Immigration has just published that there are 200,000 visa applications for the end of the year. 16,000 students are coming into New Zealand with their parents. 1,500 new refugees are supposed to come into the country, about 100 of them to our region. Just one meeting I went to recently in Murchison, they said one of the employers wants to employ 300 new staff. Just like we'll have an influx of people. We do have staff shortages. We have risks of disconnection. So, and also predictions are that our population will become more and more diverse. There is a quote from a videographer from the UK, we will never be white again. I think this is the case for New Zealand. Tasman is nowhere near as diverse as Auckland, but we are getting there. So I did my homework. We have more than 100 different ethnicities in Tasman as of the last census. I reckon it's far more now. I can give you some more details if you're interested. You're most welcome to use the slides afterwards. And if you want to have a look from 2006 to 2018, all the numbers are growing. That's our future. And that's where welcoming communities comes in. The results show people become more connected. They take on a welcoming role. within the communities. Councils, when they promote diversity and inclusion, they lead positive change, and overall it improves our well-being and the community resilience to be better connected with everyone. And there is a video you're welcome to have a look at later on. But just how does it actually work? How can we be more inclusive? It sounds really fluffy to some people, and I would say, how long is a piece of string? Fortunately, Immigration New Zealand provides a really good professional framework. So we do a stock take first. We really assess what's there. That's my job at the moment. We form a steering group, and then we formulate a plan which is guiding our actions. Everything is based on a framework, a benchmark based on 8 elements. As you can see, it's quite comprehensive: leadership, communication, economic development, civic participation. Really interesting to look at. And there are 30 sub-outcomes, and I've just got 4 examples for you to give you an idea what I'm working on and how involved council actually is internally. So you mentioned as well, effectively communicate policies. There's a lot to work on. So my role involves a lot of collaboration. This cannot be done by one part-timer. So what we're doing, we have lots of conversations. We update our welcome communication. I'm talking to a lot of rural communities and see what can we do to improve connectedness, especially for ethnic communities. We're thinking of everything from regular gatherings to very specific hui and annual events, mostly cultural celebrations. I collaborate a lot with Multicultural New Zealand. I'm working on establishing relationships with iwi. We have a trailer here from the council which can hold street parties. There will be Welcoming Week celebrated in September, and we'll have special events then. Yes, so if you are interested in more details, you are always welcome to talk to me. You can ask me questions now or get in touch.
Very, very full presentation. Thank you. Anyone got a question? Councillor Dowler.
Does Nelson City Council have a person in a role similar to yours?
Yes, they do. They just employed someone, I think 3 weeks ago. He's in the community partnerships team as well. So he focuses on Nelson and I focus on the Tasman district.
Just heard through the grapevine, there's probably 150 Chinese students coming into the Nelson Aviation College.
Yep.
We're not sure whether they're going to be in Nelson or over here or whatever. So it's quite a big.
Yeah, it's huge. 70 students just in July for NMIT. Sea Lord will have more than 100 new employees. This is really going to be big, and we have to make sure we are as welcoming and as inclusive as possible because we need good staff everywhere.
Thank you. We'll move to you. Communications, Chris, and media update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As per usual, take the report as read. It's pretty functionary apart from a summary of the communications channel survey that we talked about last meeting, which was predominantly based on Newsline, its content, its spread, etc. But we also included questions with regard to social media and traditional media. I have the full survey summary results available to councillors that wish to view it. But I am waiting for the annual Communitrack customer surveys, which also asks some pertinent questions about the relevance of Newsline as a channel. And they will compare that we're coming for the next meeting. But it does talk to us about the need for greater transparency. And in the survey, we asked questions predominantly around what would you like to hear more of And it was interesting. It was more about the decisions that we make in this room, but also a more regular update vis-a-vis finance, etc. So I think we're getting a more engaged customer base or resident base, and the questions coming in, and we need to open up our channels. And yeah, it's.
So the survey you're talking about, was that different to the Communitrack survey? So there was two running alongside.
We ran the Newsline communication channel survey from, it was actually over February, so it didn't run at the same time.
Right.
And just been collating responses, etc. We've used some questions in the Communitrack survey as a balance to the responses we've got in this, so there's a bit of a test.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie, then Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much through the chair. Chris, could you just remind me who gets Newsline? So broadly speaking, who's entitled to get it? Because I'm always going to meetings and then people are saying, well, I don't get that and I don't get that. So I'm just curious to know what's the distribution of it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, distribution is via hand delivery, very much with the newspapers and Rural Post, etc. Essentially, it is for every letterbox in the district. However, we understand there's various fluctuations of whether some people will deliver it, and this is predominantly with their relationship with New Zealand Post, and it depends who you're talking to and how, to be frank, to how they feel on the day. We've moved around some of those restrictions and headaches with regard to Murchison and St Arnaud, where we've actually chartered an independent courier to do that on our behalf at less than what New Zealand Post were going to charge us. Yes, there will be some holes. To be frank, Councillor, hand delivery of free material is probably not a job that most people would go to after varsity. It is dependent on individuals to a degree. We do service checks on a regular basis, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of the 21,500 that we print every fortnight are delivered.
Okay, so if in actual fact a community member says, well, I don't get one, then our response as councillors is that, well, register the fact that you don't get it with the council, because every letterbox is entitled to receive it. Is that correct?
That is correct. If there is an address, if you do get this request to your councillor, I would ask that you take the address and drop me a text or an email, and I will follow up with the delivery agent.
Great, that's useful. Thank you, Chris.
Councillor Hill, sorry, my microphone just died.
Thank you, through you, Chair. That was helpful hearing about the Newsline. So over here in the Bay, I hear from people who say that they've never had Newsline with a letterbox and address, and they never get it. And I've never really understood quite why some do and some don't. So yeah, good to know that. In terms of, and thanks for your report, Chris, in terms of 6.1, in the last 6 weeks, the website's been visited by 41,000 odd users, and 34,800 were new users. It just seems extraordinary somehow, doesn't it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, quite often you will find that a chunk of those new users will be people from outside the district. So it's not as if we've got another 34,000 new people moved in, but it is because it's on the web. It gets searched from all sorts of places. So yeah, it's not, we haven't just discovered another 34,000 users in Tasman.
No, I wouldn't imagine so. Do you know any idea of what's prompted this? Like, does this happen at other times? Are there sort of events that happen in Tasman where we make the news and people look in on something, or can we make anything of it?
I can actually. we do notice spikes, and if spikes are high, for example, the obvious ones, weather events, also, disasters, etc. People come in, but there's also timely events. Whether there's a media article, people will quite often shoot through to the Council of Origin. Obviously, certain subjects that we carry that are unique, which are things like we're building a dam.
That's very
they can spark a spike across the country as people get interested. We can go back, but the research would be pretty blunt.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just got to just have a follow up with, in terms of our social media following, how do we compare to other councils throughout New Zealand?
Scientifically, I couldn't tell you. I will certainly ask that question, but my feeling from a summary point of view, and perhaps a little bit uneducated on this specific point, we would be reasonably high. Our traffic is higher than most. We certainly punch above our weight for councils with regard to regular posts. Sarah's putting up between 3 and 4 a day, where most councils will put 2 to 3 a week. We have a lot of traffic. And I think a certain amount of that has got to do with our unitary status as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So someone like to move the recommendation in relation to this item? Move Councillor Ogilvie, seconded Councillor Dowler. There's no further discussion. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Against? The resolution is carried. So we will now break for lunch, and we will come back at 1:40 just to have a little bit longer today. Thank you. So if staff who need to be here for the start of the meeting, 1:40. At this stage, yeah. We'll have to make a decision around that a bit later, depending on how we go, because it wasn't scheduled to start at 2:30, and we may well be through the meeting by then, I'm hoping.
Yep.
Otherwise, we'd just have a free for all, wouldn't we? Have every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Right. Good afternoon, councillors. If we resume our seats, we'll resume the meeting. And we are on page 66 of our agenda on diligent. And firstly, we're going to go to the Program Management Office post-COVID-19 stimulus funding packages progress report. And Annette, I see you're online ready to go. So when you're ready, please.
Tēnā koe tātou. I'm taking the report as read and available for questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? I just did see, Annette, a question from it where you'd had some visits and you'd taken some people up to the dam. Didn't have any luck extracting any more money out of them for us?
Well, that's unfortunately, it's one of the issues that we're now fighting with inflation, because the environmental projects are lasting another 5 years and they're probably going to have to do scope some of the stuff they're wanting to do.
Is that likely to happen?
We're exploring other alternatives that council may have to contribute, or we might have to find additional funding from elsewhere. But in my experience working in research, science and technology for many years, the funding's the funding, it's not indexed, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Move to a question from Councillor Butler.
Yeah, thank you. I just wondered if you had an update on point 4.5, further work with two key iwi stakeholders. Are you confident that that is going to be resolved and the work can continue or start?
Well, at the moment, well, the total deliverable is 40 restored natural wetlands, and the deliverable for this year was to do 8, and none of them have even started. So the issue is that we just don't have the capacity to do the cultural assessment. And so we are working with them to see if we can get over this. TUI, we have been able to outsource the requirement, but that will cost extra and eat into our budget. So something might have to give, and we're still working with the others. So the answer is we're working on it.
Oh, that's just got to get what the issue is. It's just a question of capacity from their point of view to actually do cultural assessments on each wetland. Is that right? Thank you.
Councillor Dowler.
Yeah, just a point of clarification on page 69, item 9.6, it's the attachment 1. It's the list of all the work that's been done. And I see the second column in quite a few lines. It's got under the program name, it's got CIP, Three Waters Services Reform. Why is that mentioned?
So that's the program name. Richard can maybe expand, but when we were given the money originally, it was sort of redirected to fall under the wider stimulus umbrella, but it was actually part of the, it was a sweetener perhaps as part of the Three Waters reform that the government gave us for Three Waters related projects.
Richard.
It was part of the first tranche of funding that we got for Three Waters, which is what we utilised for that, yeah.
So it's a CIP, what does that relate to?
A Crown Infrastructure Partnership, who the government actually asked to look after and manage the way the funding was spent. And so Annette and the team within the PMO have been talking directly with CIP, who have been looking after this program.
I just, because the thing that threw me away was when I read it, it talked about the Motueka reticulation Thorpe Street water main replacement, which was done in 2020, and finished in 2021. Well, Three Waters wasn't finished, wasn't.
No, that was the fund. That was the post-COVID funding. They linked it to the Three Waters, but that funding came through to fund those projects, the water and wastewater projects. It was not only that; there was a couple of treatment plants that were funded as well. So it did come from that funding that was kind of part of the Three Waters work. Yeah,
snuck it in without us knowing. Good.
Any further questions? If not, thank you for the report, Annette. And someone of the mind to move the resolution? Move Councillor Butler. Do we have a second? Councillor Turley? Did you want to speak, Councillor Turley? Thank you. I'll put that resolution in. So all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. And that was Councillors Butler and Turley. Kathy. We'll move. Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is Community Infrastructure Group Activity Report. Richard, I guess there's a number in there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we start, I'll get Mike to introduce a new staff member that we've got on board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, good afternoon, councillors. So we have here with us today Sam Flirt, who's our asset data quality specialist. He tells me he's a digital cartographer. So he is responsible for the team that inputs as-built information into the Confirm Asset Management System and the GIS system. And then this is then displayed on the local maps and top of the south maps. So basically keeps all our information on our assets up to date. He came to us from Becca. And prior to that, he had around about a decade with MWH Stantec. So knows the area well, knows council well, has worked with us in the past. So we're very pleased to have him on board. So welcome to him.
Yeah, welcome, Sam. Hope you enjoy your time here.
Looking forward to do some meaningful marketing in the beautiful region.
Oh, well, good idea. Well done. Yeah, welcome. Right, Richard, anything from your part of the report firstly, which is on page 70, councillors?
Probably the only thing is the general workload at the moment. It's obviously out in the community, there's a lot of requests and demands for things, and so the staff are fairly heavily involved. Suffice to say that I know that some of the staff have been exposed to some very difficult customers who feel they should get what they want, and when there's kind of a process to be followed and the like, they take it out on staff, and that's been kind of hard to listen to. And so we're definitely trying to support staff and say it's not you, it's actually the organisation they're having a crack at. So there's a bit of that going on. As far as the Three Waters reform, I'm just looking down through, this is probably, it's still up to date. Some Three Waters reform, the way it's going on, you can write a report one week and it's out of date the next, but this outlines what's going on. And I know councillors know specifically a separate program is going in place on dealing with the submission, and we're running some webinars and some drop-in centres, which has been publicised, I think, in the next day or so. So that's all it is, for unless there are any questions on Three Waters reform, and hopefully I'll be able to answer. But that's it from me.
Thank you. Anything for Richard's section? If not, we'll move on to Councillor Mackenzie's. Good job to some people.
Thank you. Double hand waving. Through you, Mr. Chairman, just a question for Richard under 1.8. So in terms of the list of bullet points that the council would like to submit on, when it says representing Tasman's views, is that meaning how the voice of the customer is heard, or is representing Tasman views meaning the view of the council? Or because I mean, I think one of the issues we've heard loud and clear is that residents want to be able to understand how their voice is heard in the Three Waters model. So I'm just wanting to make sure that that's included in our bullet points.
I think my reference to that is about local representation, and making sure that in the governance aspects that we cover that off, because I know there's been some discussion about a large water entity with 22 councils effectively in it, or all the assets from 22 councils, is how the new water services entity is actually going to deal with local issues. That's at a governance level. That's probably what that's referring to.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further, Councillor Turley, your microphone's on.
Oh, sorry.
Any further questions in relation to that? If not, we'll leave on to.
Perhaps I'll just add to that, Dwayne and his team and Helen are kind of taking the lead on this now. So I'm just keeping a watchful eye, but they're basically doing the grunt behind this. So really grateful for them to the way they're putting this together.
Councillor Butler.
Yes, John. Is there actually, do you think it's actually a feasible possibility that there may be a change to the water entities, or a movement, that we would have a choice to go in South Island or something? I mean, is that a realistic thing? I agree we should submit on it, but I just wondered if you had any.
No, I don't think. I think the government's got its mind pretty set on the 4 entities at the moment. Yeah, but nevertheless, I think we still need to put our views up. Personally, although there's a transition phase going through, trying to get 22 councils to not only align what they do, but move into a new entity is going to take a lot longer than 2 years. And I know there's some work being done on that, but yeah, that's just if it's not done properly, it could end up with what I would describe as a train crash potentially.
Thank you. Councillor Dow.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. I personally think we should be part of the South Island team, not the bottom end of the North Island. Otherwise, we're going to get screwed over like we do with Waka Kotahi quite often. The state of our state highways down here is actually pretty sad. In this area, the top 3 councils on the top of the south. Just recently I went down to Westport for a weekend, and they've been the State Highway 6 down there where you turn off at Ngahua was trashed through to Westport. It's a pristine highway. There's damn near not a bump in it. And it's been flooded and destroyed, and it's been fixed. And that's in the southern zone of the South Island dealt with. And I'm just worried that we're getting screwed over by not getting enough funding here, and I'm just absolutely scared that we'll end up in the same situation with this water entity thing. Bottom of the barrel. Don't worry about them, they'll be right.
Thank you. We'll move on to program, what's it called? Program delivery, that's for you, Russell, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll largely take my report as read. Just one area I'd like to highlight. Someone asked when the grandstand came for council for funding, how often does that occur? So I've got a table here that showed what the capital spend has been in terms of construction over the last 2.5 years. And of the $71 million of delivered projects, we've only ever asked council for 1 million after construction has started, and that's less than 2%. So it's quite rare when we come back to council to ask for money in construction. We sometimes ask for money before construction if we've tendered and the market is charging us more than we thought. But generally, we have a fairly robust risk process to live within our means.
Thank you. Russell, I just have a question in relation to the emergency generator at the Golden Bay Rec Park. Are we fully funding that, or is that being funded in conjunction with civil defence, and why?
I'm not absolutely sure of that funding source.
Richard? Holly?
It has been fully funded by us, and as to why, I'm not sure. So it was included in the budgets through the LTP process.
Right. Because I know that other rec facilities have asked, and it seems that sometimes it's driven by civil defence for us to provide it for them, which I have some frustration with. But Councillor Butler, you might be able to help.
Yeah, I have. My understanding is that the way that that the rec centre was built was it was something to do with the electrical layout, and that they actually have already got a generator, but it doesn't cover some of the buildings, so they need to get another one. That's my understanding of it. So it was not. Yeah, it's just a bit of a problem about design.
And it does seem like quite an expensive generator at $71,500. So we've got a number of hands up now. While we're on that, we'll go to Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's the civil defence purposes, but that's where we go. Civil defence emergency. It's the rec park. If the power's out, then we need the generator. So that, and it says that in the table, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. So it's not there in case the rec park's out of power and they want to play netball on a Thursday night. Let's crank up the generator. It's not for that, or for badminton. So it's a civil defence matter. And I think the generator was stored down outside the TDC buildings there in town, the office, for a while, and was going to be moved up to the park, which I think it has been.
Quite often the generators are used, as you say, at those facilities because they become the welfare base in a civil defence emergency. But yeah, I still have a bit of a problem that we have to pay and civil defence don't front up with the money, or some money.
When you say civil defence is us.
Well, in part, yeah. Anything further, Councillor Hill?
No, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie and then Councillor Walker.
Thank you. I've just got 2 or 3 questions. I think they'll be reasonably quick, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I was going to ask about that generator as well. I wonder why you and I were asking the same question. Because, I mean, the point is that we need to understand what our responsibilities are, because we've got other communities who are asking the same questions around, perhaps we need a generator. So we just need to understand whose responsibility it is to provide them. And that could be an action point, I guess. So I'll just whip through my questions rapid fire. Did we deliberately skip over the reserves and facilities activity report, Mr. Chairman?
No, that was my mistake, and my apologies to Richard Hollow, but I'm having issues with my iPad wanting to continually die. So we'll come back to that next.
Oh, okay. I'll hold one of those questions then. So look, we're not in the project report, we've got the Berryfield Lower Queen Street intersection upgrade. This is a really minor little point, but in the commentary, we say that the project is on hold due to a lack of funding, but it would be more correctly worded that it's the timing of the funding, in my opinion. I mean, we made a conscious decision to defer the funding based on the advice that we've got, and then we talk about a lack of funding, but it's a timing issue. Then I've got a question about the Richmond South new pump stations and Rising Main. Oh, it says that project's on hold pending the outcome of the FDS.
Right, so we'll go back to the Lower Cream Berryfield intersection question firstly and hear from Jamie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, perhaps we could have more accurately described what the situation is. And in fact, the council have moved its share of the funding to 2023-2024 financial year, but we still need to step through the Waka Kotahi business case process and apply for their share of the funding. And that's probably the bigger uncertainty in all of this. So we're just trying to signal that uncertainty about actually getting funding from Waka Kotahi.
Okay, so perhaps you could just tweak the wording a bit.
Yes, through the chair. Yes, from a project's point of view, we haven't got the funds to do the delivery of the project. From our transport point of view, it's a process to go through to get some of that funding. So we could have had some extra words to clarify that. But what it means is the project's currently on hold.
Yeah,
until there is certainty in funds.
And then you had a further question about something in Richmond South.
But I just wanted to check the wording there. It says that the project's on hold pending outcome of the FDS review. But so my question is that correct, or is it on hold pending the outcome of a plan change?
It's one or the other. One of the reasons why we got it on hold is we're not sure what size that pump and rising main should be. If there's no more growth in the areas around there, then we know what size it is. But if the FDS intimates or indicates additional growth down there, or if there's zone changes down there, well, we'll need to know that before we size the pumping and rising main. Mike, sure, if you had some more comment.
Through you, Mr. Chair. There's also a question of actual location. So if the FDS goes as far south as we expect it could go, the actual proposed location is not going to be correct either. So we're going to have to relocate the pump and do a complete design for a new location as well.
Thank you. Anything further, Councillor McKenzie?
Well, no, I guess I was pondering there is a subtle difference between an FDS. Well, it's a big difference between the FDS and a plan change. And I just wanted to be clear that it was on hold pending the outcome of the FDS as opposed to a plan change. So what you're telling me is that it's correct. It's the FDS that determines whether it's on hold or not.
I suspect with the conversation, it's probably more the plan change because the FDS just gives an indication and there's still some plan changes to occur to implement the FDS. So strictly, this probably is the plan change rather than the FDS. That's right.
Thank you. So that's the point that I'm trying to get to. So could we change that narrative so that it doesn't refer to the FDS, but it refers to the plan change? Because I'm more comfortable with that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll do.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. With regards to Golden Bay and that generator, so in 2018, we had a generator at the Motueka Rec Centre, which was opened as a welfare station centre through GETA. I then came onto council in 2019 and found that that generator that was at the Mot Rec Centre had been moved to Golden Bay. And the staff at the time explained to me that's because when there's an outage and there's a crisis, it's very hard to get something to Golden Bay, hence they'd moved Mot's generator across to there. And there was a discussion around this table with regards to civil defence and what would look like moving forward. And I know that, like, if there was a state of emergency in Motueka, I've been led to believe, and I've got no reason to not believe it, that there were other generators in our local ward that we could tap into, which is probably what other wards would be having to do as well. So just, I guess, a point of clarification, this one in Golden Bay, is it replacing the one that got taken over, or I don't quite understand.
Well, can I just start off by saying that the reason why the Golden Bay was in there, I think the Civil Defence actually put a request in as part of the long-term plan for a generator in Golden Bay. And from my understanding, and Richard could probably confirm this, but the current generator at Golden Bay would probably end up coming back to Motueka. So
thank you. Can I have that minuted? That's all I have.
Wait a moment. Let me just make sure that I've got it right. So
okay.
I'll ask Richard Hollier to confirm that.
Richard Hollier.
Thank you, Chair. Certainly the one in Golden Bay will replace that one, but I'm not sure where it currently is, whether it is in the garage at Golden Bay or whether it's back at Motueka. But we've recently been talking about registration of the trailer and so on. So, and that was being dealt with by Mark Wentworth, who's based in Motueka. So I'm not quite sure where it's currently residing, but it's serving both facilities at the present time.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
Right, nothing. Councillor Dow.
Yeah, just on the page, whatever, 77, stormwater land purchase program. I see it's got a figure of $4,152,449, and the wording says that the final cost for one purchase, for property purchase in Richmond West, are planned. Is that 4 million just for one property?
No, there's several properties. The dearest property is about 2.3 million, which we've just executed. And most of them are around about the 300 mark.
This question, because it's the way it's worded, final cost for one purchase.
I did see that.
No, it's for a number of purchases. That's the total budget.
Yeah.
4 million.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you. Nothing else on, no, Councillor Ogilvie, my apologies.
Oh, that's okay, thank you. Up to what page are we going for this part, Mr. Chair?
Halfway down 81.
Okay. If we go back to page 76 in the roading section, there's no mention there of the walking and cycling programs. And again, I mentioned this this morning. Can we have these on a regular basis in the program so that we know exactly where we are with all the walking and cycling activities as a result of both the long-term plan and the annual plan and also the strategy?
I can answer that, Mr. Chairman. These are only projects the Project Delivery Office are delivering. So those projects you talked about have not been allocated to the Project Delivery Office. That's why they're not in this report.
Right. So where do we see them anyway?
Well, we can actually report on those, but when they get allocated, in other words, when they're getting started, they will then end up in the Project Delivery report.
Well, I'm just thinking, for example, the Richmond one this year, I think it was about 300,000 on the cycle lanes and a bit less than that in Motueka. And I was, here we are, almost the end of the financial year, and looking for a sort of a program delivery report.
Well, I suggest you ask Jamie to probably could answer that question. And prior to them being delivered to the project, if the project delivery team does deliver that, Jamie will be doing his report on when those projects are coming up, as and when they come up.
Okay, Jamie, can you answer that?
I can probably add through you, Mr. Chair. So the intent for those projects was always that the delivery would follow the adoption of the walking and cycling strategy. Now that milestone was achieved just a couple of short weeks ago. The other element that we talked about this morning is the Streets for People. So we want to integrate that Richmond and Motueka Cycle Lanes project with our Streets for People project. So I certainly heard what the councillor said about needing to make progress on these, and that's absolutely in the front of our minds. And we're hoping in the next month or two, as we zero in on what funding we actually get through the Streets for People project, that we can then report to the council exactly what we're going to be able to deliver and when. So that scope, as you acknowledged this morning, is still a little bit uncertain. We know generally what we want to deliver because it's outlined in the walking and cycling strategy and in our long-term plan already. So I absolutely hear what you're saying, and we'll make sure that that's clear in future reports. Yep.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And item is on page 77, item 1249, to do with the, I'll just pick it up myself. Oh, yes, the discharge system 1249. It says the hydraulic comment. The hydraulic modelling results are due in July. No further movement with the landowner. I presume that's the church as the landowner we're talking about, over gaining easements. They have an official letter from our consents team that we cannot waive the higher ground level requirements for flooding / sea level rise. Iwi consultation is being planned. I just want to comment that not very far away from the church, there's been the Woodlands Rest Home, which is Oceania owned. They just built, probably at their current ground level, quite a large community room, library, meeting room, etc. So I'm just concerned that the consents team are saying no to the church, which may be hindering our own development for the stormwater entry into Woodlands Canal from Motueka West. So that's my question, really, probably not for anybody perhaps to ask here. I just want to highlight there seems to be a difference in activity and permission on these two projects.
I can, through this chair, give you some comments on that. There's several things occurring at the same time. We're requiring an easement from the church to put some stormwater through. The church is in the process of trying to sell some land to a developer. The developer wants to develop it, and they're looking for an exemption for lifting the land due to potential flooding. So our consents team now have a requirement in certain parts of not to have the land raised up to ensure floor levels above a certain level. And they were looking for an exemption, which we can't grant because nothing to do with us. And that was just complicating the easement negotiations with the church, because they were then being complicated by the developer who was trying to buy land from the church, and mixing the two things together. So we tried to separate them out and stick to our requirement, which is to get the stormwater through a bit of church land, which they don't object to. And it's in the developer's interest as well, because they will need that stormwater outlet to do their development. And often developers wish to do things that we can't allow.
Well, I'm not but what I'm saying is that there was one development about 2 doors away, quite, as big as a room almost, which is proceeding without the same requirement for raising the ground level. And that's exactly, yeah, extraordinary.
Yeah. So perhaps you could.
Yes, on page 76, item 1198, the Upper Moot Tree Shed Path. It says that we're in the process of compulsory acquisition. Can you just tell me what that process entails and how long it's likely to be? Because these are questions being asked.
Through Mr. Chair, I'm no expert on the compulsory acquisition process. It's not something that's happened very commonly. It comes with very, very specific requirements under the legislation, and by all accounts, it's not a fast process. So I wouldn't even hazard a guess. The landowner who we'll be negotiating with may decide that they want to negotiate with us, or they may prefer to take it through the the full process. We just don't know.
Since it's a safety issue, does that give it a higher priority than a lump of land that's sort of it's been built on or something?
It's one of the requirements that we've got a whole linkage of walking and cycling network, and there's a piece of that network missing, and the landowner is the missing piece. And we're doing our best to negotiate in good faith because it is a safety issue. But sometimes that becomes a challenge, and we try to acquire it using the Public Works Act.
So just to add, there's no special provisions under the Public Works Act that override the usual process, and that's to protect landowners' rights. Yep. Thank you, Chair. This section of the report's in section 4, starting on bottom page 70 and 71. And then it has 2 attachments, one for the capital program update, and the Richmond Aquatic Centre, and those are on pages 119 and 129. Happy to answer any questions around any of those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was really with the Golden Bay Rec Centre. I mean, the paragraph in there just begs the question as to why we didn't do the bunding in the plant room when we built the centre.
Richard. Through you, Chair, that's it's a very pertinent question, and one we've been asking as well. So the project was a design build project, and yeah, that was done about 5 or 6 years ago. So I'm not sure why that wasn't bunded and a drain put in as part of that process. I guess normally you would think it would be in that sort of situation.
So are we going to just drill down to understand that more? Because whilst we can claim insurance, actually, you know, the more we claim, the higher our premiums are going to be. So, you know, I mean, was there some kind of, root cause as to why we didn't do it that we need to learn from?
Certainly, we've been looking further at trying to locate the contract and also the drawings and warranties and so on associated with that contract. And at the moment, we are having some difficulty locating those, but we're still looking.
Very good, thank you.
Can I say that it's probably been at least 6 years since this facility was completed? And so the question we really want to find out is what sort of warranty was put on it as a result of that design build. That's probably the key question. Even if the warranty is out of spec, once we find out who the contractor was and what was done, we might be asking them some questions as to why that wasn't resolved at the time.
Any further questions in relation to reserves and facilities? If not, well, I think what's next? Transportation, I think, from memory, Jamie, is it? Yes, it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to take the report as read and answer any questions.
Did you want to make, Brian mentioned this to me this morning, perhaps you might like to make some comment about the recognition from Mike Thomas. Not many of us around the table will know about Mike, but apparently it was well deserved.
Yes, he's one of the unsung heroes on page, 82. 82, thank you. Yeah, section 6.3 to 6.5. Yeah, no, it's been great to see an unsung hero, you know, a guy who kind of works really hard, but does the basics well, and in fact is leading the way in New Zealand in some ways on this stuff. And to me, that's an example of how our alliance style project in contract with Downers is adding value to our program. So we're enabling the people who are doing the doing do it well and taking barriers out of their way and working together in ways that are that other more traditional commercial arrangements struggle to do. So yeah, it's been awesome. And he had a meeting with Waka Kotahi yesterday because they're really interested in the work we're doing, their environmental team. So it's all reflecting well on our council, I guess, and our staff.
Well, thank you for that. Any further questions for Jamie? Just Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. I did have my hand up earlier around the rec centre and those questions. We have asked those questions, Councillor McKenzie, over the side, of course, and we're pretty intrigued about whether, you know, it was included in the design and not built, or whether there must be some liability somewhere or some responsibility. So certainly concerned to see a whole floor having to be replaced, and yeah, the call on our insurance. In terms of transport, kia ora, Jamie, the Moribibi Bridge cycle path, have we got a start date there? I think I was told a little while ago, May, but is that close?
I'm sorry, I'll probably need the projects team who are managing that to answer that one.
Thank you.
Russell.
Yes, we have got a contractor awarded, Egypt Construction. We're all due to start pretty soon.
As in weeks or months?
Mm-hmm.
As in weeks or months?
As in weeks.
Okay.
It's great, thank you.
Just a further question from me, Jamie, just in relation to the weather events we've had. We had another recent one in Murchison about the day of the community council just before, which would be, I think it was the 13th of what month are we in now? June. It's hard to keep up the months, let alone the days. So that's just brought a few more challenges, I guess, and you're aware there was a bit of feedback around the Tutaki South Road, I think. Are we doing anything to remediate some of that work with some priority?
All I can say is we've raised some issues with the contractor down there and sought reassurance that, you know, that the people in those valleys are getting the level of service that's expected. And we've received that reassurance, and they've brought in extra resources, and that's what we wanted to hear. So hopefully that will cover it off.
That's good, thank you. Any further questions related to transportation? If not, we'll move on to property, I think, next. Nick.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, tēnā koutou. I'll take the report as read. If I could make just a couple of comments. As you'll see, we've improved our reporting for property, and the focus at the moment is the jobs that are 3 years and older, which is primarily land acquisitions and community leases. These can be very complicated, and we're hoping that the proposed policy and community leases will help clarify some of the issues. To me, it's fortuitous that the funding's been held up with the Berryfields project, because it's been very slow dealing with NMIT. We hope to have that purchase agreement resolved in the next couple of months, but their solicitor is proving quite difficult. And finally, item 6 in my bit, about the land purchase that's going to be presented to the next full council meeting on the 30th.
Thank you. Just a question on myself in relation to those 107 jobs that are 3 or more years older. Is that lack of resources? No one's been pushing for them to be resolved at low priority? Or is it a combination of all of the above plus more?
A lot of them seem to be around communication, really. The community leases, for example, we don't get a response, or there's almost an antagonistic relationship with the tenant. Land acquisitions tend to be slow and take a while to progress. But it's actually quite a complicated issue. I think the admittedly, there's a wee bit around management. We're looking at introducing better management systems, trying a system called Release at the moment, which is a commercial property management system. If it works out, we'll also add the community leases to it as well.
Thank you. Any further questions relating to property? Councillor Hill, you've got your hand up. Is that from previously or for this one?
No, that's because I've got my hand up. Thank you, Chair. In terms of the community leases, I went to the Pohara Boat Club AGM last night, and it was good to hear there that Nick, you going over a meeting with the members really has helped open the understanding, I think, of the issues that are there in that lease process. And I can report that we've got a new committee there now, and that are fresh and going to relaunch. Excuse the pun, but there was particular comment around among those members and committee members about just how helpful it was to sit down with you, and I'm not sure who was with you, but to be able to speak through things. So often it's about the process, isn't it? And what gets in the way. And I think some of the language in the lease didn't quite make sense, or there was some confusion around lights and all sorts of things. But just want to pass on that the benefit of being able to sit down with people and work through them can't be overstated. Thank you.
Nick. One of the tasks that came out of that was to write leases in plain English and reduce the amount of legalese.
I think the boat club, which doesn't have a lot of money, not a lot of reserves, and has had a loss this last year. Spent $6,000 on legal fees around this lease process, and it's not complete yet. So community groups just can't afford to do that, and there'll be a number of reasons why they've engaged lawyers to do the negotiating, but there's got to be a better way for our community groups.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor King.
Just following along from the point made by Councillor Hill, every time I hear technology and software, I'm like, great, I understand that has a place, but when it becomes substitute for or a reason not to engage in the conversation that Councillor Hill was just highlighting, so much of stuff that passes over my desk is generated from an email trail where I'm sure the email wasn't necessarily intended to cause offence or upset someone but we get into an email and then finally someone gets a conversation, and you tend to always get that response, oh, now we've sat down and talked about it, we've managed to, and it's like, maybe start there, follow it with an email, as opposed to the other way around. So, and I understand the time and resources that's needed to put into that. But when I think about how many times, by the time things get to me, there is a lot of resources being burned.
And
time and people's, and it might be sitting at a desk typing instead of going and visiting someone and talking. But honestly, that is one of the biggest things that we've got to continue to get better at. So utilising software as a tool, as a reminder of a process, but never letting it substitute or get in the way of having those conversations, talking with people. And at the earliest time it becomes apparent from the email trail or the correspondence that there's a degree of confusion or a degree of antagonism coming up, then that's the time to get in and have a discussion. So that is just something, and it's not particularly related to property. That is like across the board. We're in the people business at the end of the day, and there's nothing more people-y than having a conversation or a discussion. So,
thank you. So with that, I think we can leave property and move on to. Did you want to respond there?
Oh, I totally agree.
We'll move on to water and waste activities update. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to take my report as read. There's just 3 comments I'd like to make or bring attention to. The Takaka ribs, we've had issues with them blinding and overflowing and having to do also remediation in the recent weeks and manage it. Well, we've got the remediation works will kick off next Wednesday. Be done in 2 phases, doing 4 cells first. We will test them. And if that works successfully, then we will follow up soon with the other 4 cells. It's going to take about 4 days to do those 4 cells next week. And hopefully that will resolve the problem for the interim. They need a much larger design and they need to be expanded in the future. But we'll probably come back for more CapEx funding in the future to add to those cells. The other item we talk about is the Parker Street water treatment plant. So we basically, the ops team started trialing the treatment plant this week on Monday. By the end of Monday, we had reached 40% of the network. And by the end of yesterday, we had supplied water to the full network. We had tested the working with the rec centre as a backup supply if anything went wrong. And we had pushed it to its maximum flow rate of 59 litres per second quite successfully. So we'll continue with those trials over the next week. And then we'll start working towards the next step towards chlorination and working with iwi on a formal opening and that sort of thing. So in the meantime, it's tracking really well. Very pleased with the performance of the plant. And then the last item I was going to comment on, right at the end of my report, there's a series of graphs for each of the 3 waters and the solid waste and so on as well, rivers, and showing reactive and routine maintenance for the year and how we're tracking against that. And there's comments there for sort of short exception reports on what the major overs or unders were. And I expect in the future we'll be repeating those graphs about every quarter. So you keep an eye on our maintenance or contractual operations maintenance costs. That's all from me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Tufnell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the subject of quality of stormwater, I've been a little bit concerned lately as I've walked around some of the new subdivisions and seen what seemingly to me the contractors have sort of lost the plot a wee bit insofar as being careful on their construction sites. What's happening now is you're getting a concentration of builders. And I mean, the young guys that come in, they come in and they park their cars and their vehicles on the already grassed areas. They're going onto the sites beyond most sites where there's a house being built. You've already gravelled up to the house site. So if they were going straight in, they go wander all around. And the amount of mud that's coming out onto those streets, particularly in Richmond West at the moment, is quite appalling. And I mean, ultimately, all that's doing is going out into the estuary. And we know the problems we've got with the estuary. So I think it needs a little bit of a wee chat with the contractors to get their behavioural up a little better. I'm not quite sure whose department this really falls under, but it certainly needs some attention. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. We've actually, for Tuesday, we were meant to have, I think about a week ago, a meeting with the contractors, civil contractors group locally, but that was postponed because the chairman was ill. And I think it's at the end of the month now we're going to be having that meeting. So it's an ideal time just to remind them of those issues. And we should be able to get through to most of them at that meeting.
Will that actually include the building contracts or just civil?
No, we don't deal with the building contractors. Well, we've got a development meeting every week that from staff across council, and we can raise it there once. So that'll cover the consent side as well as the building side and so on as well.
Okay, well, as I say, as long as it gets back to the guys that are actually working on site, because at the moment I was really quite appalled at what we're allowing to happen.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. May not be your department, but the little Cod territory and the reserve area, which we looked at and developed into a wetland in the last few months, how did that operate during the recent rainfall events we've had? Any comments at all, any negative aspects at all, or did it function pretty well?
Look, I've just noticed a email came through yesterday afternoon. I haven't had a chance to look at it, where reserves and my team are talking about sitting together and discussing how the maintenance is done of that area and how it's performing and so on. But I haven't looked at it in any detail yet, and I haven't spoken to all the parties yet. But there is a discussion happening quite shortly. I know Richard might want to comment on that.
I can't talk to the performance, but I can talk to the process that's going on. So after the events last year, we've been working across a number of different departments coming together to look at that wetland area, and we're at the moment trying to set up an engagement with the different iwi over how we move forward in terms of finding a solution involving, you know, the drainage into that wetland and from it and the outlet to the sea there. So it's a sort of work in progress at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. The other item actually relates to the reason I brought that because I see you mentioned the Pinehill stream going into the bay. So made me think of the criteria situation. But the other item really is the Wharf Road gate was closed. I've been watching the old Wharf Road flat gate pretty closely the last 2 weeks because we've had a reasonably low tide. And it's just simply not functioning effectively at all. It's not stopping the tide when the tide comes in, and it's not releasing the stormwater when the flat gate's supposed to be open. It's more often almost stable for 24 hours a day rather than shutting and opening as they ought to do. So it's going to cost probably about $1 million to replace it. But it needs to, the other gate, which is electronic, works perfectly. In fact, there are 2 electronic gates, they both work perfectly. This one is a metallic flap gate. It's fishing always partly open, never closed. So what I'm asking is, can somebody just monitor that and look at whether there's any funding at all, even in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, to look at replacing that particular gate because it's not working as it ought to be working.
Mike, through you, Mr. Chair, we don't operate that gate. We leave it open, as I understand it. And when we need to flood out that area to kill off the weeds, we close it. We flood the area for a few days, kill off the weeds, and then we open it. We don't need that gate for operation. The new Wharf Road gate is the one that actually is our control mechanism. So that is maybe a few times a year when the weeds get out of control that we actually use that gate. It's not part of our control mechanism.
This is the Thorpe Train gate I'm talking about, not the Woodlands gate.
But you said Old Wharf Road.
Yeah, they both are in Old Wharf Road. One's called Woodlands Drain, which is near the rec centre, and the other one is the Thorpe Drain going eastwards towards the coast. So I'm sorry.
Okay, so Wouter has already responded to you about that one, and it does not justify the cost of $1 million to replace it. It works very efficiently in terms of fish passage. It doesn't seal totally most of the time, but that's actually what you want to achieve. And when the tide's high enough on one side, it has enough pressure to close it. And when the outfall is high enough, it has enough to open it and let it flow. So it's actually working as intended.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, in terms of my own monitoring, and I'm not an expert monitor, no, but the last 2 weeks I've looked at it in particular, and it visually is not changing at all. It's at that sort of an angle at low tide and high tides and tides in between. So look, I'm not asking for an immediate renewal, but I think it ought to be monitored, and there may be some way in which the mechanism can be oiled or changed somehow to make it operative much more effectively and efficiently than it is at present.
Perhaps you could have an offline discussion with Mike because we need to move on.
Well, but I have raised it with Wouter, and I got a response from Wouter. I was then talking about a renewal reasonably quickly, but I think this is just an ongoing work whether Robert Workman or Wouter or somebody else can look at reasonably in a positive way so we can get it working and functioning properly. The electronic one works perfectly, goes up and down as it needs to. This one is a flat gate, and because it's so heavy and so big, it'll be that maroon piece there, that's the size of it. And it's metal, heavy and not functioning at all well.
As I say, have a discussion with Mike, and Mike can perhaps alleviate some of your concerns or find a way forward. So yeah, so would someone have a mind to move the resolution, because we do need to keep moving on? Move councillor Dowler. Councillor Hill.
Had my hand up for a little while. Just a quick comment, if I may.
Do you need to?
Yeah, I do. Yep, just as we all do. Thank you. Just in terms of the Takagil wastewater treatment plant and the remediation there, the communication that we've had from Juliet has been exceptional. So right from the get-go around what was happening, why it was happening, what's likely to be done, what is being done. So if you could pass on appreciation to her for her linking in with us, it's just been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. And are you happy to second the resolution?
I am.
Receives a report. Thank you. So it's been moved, councillor Dowler, seconded, councillor Hill. All those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no, carried. We'll move on to the next item. Thank you, gentlemen, for that. And we'll move on to environmental information update. Rob. Welcome, Steve. When you're ready, Rob.
Tanakwe Council, good afternoon. So today, given the success of my last report to the committee, where Anne did a jump-in presentation, I've asked Steph if she could come along. So Steph is our team leader in the environmental field space, and she'll describe her role. So if I could take my report as read, I do have an immediate apology. It is not covering the period from December through to March. It's actually from March till now. That's just an embarrassing oversight on my place, sorry. For equality, I can say we've had no exceedances for equality so far this year, which is very good. We are starting to creep up above 40, so we're probably not far off. If this weather continues for another few days, I think we'll be starting to push that. And I know the committee will be interested to know that this winter we have 3 remote monitors, air quality monitors in Wakefield and in Brightwater, and 1 back in Rewalker. So this is what we were doing last year. And I think that's probably enough from me.
Thank you. Steve, welcome.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me along. Is that better?
Yeah, just
Okay.
pull it round closer and perhaps into woods, because you've got a relatively soft voice. Pull the microphone in rather than yourself.
That better?
Yeah,
All right.
hopefully.
So may I draw your attention to the slideshow that's just up behind you there? And just even on this title slide, it's quite a nice shot of the Waiti River in flood last July. And we'll come back to that site a little bit later. Underneath that wave is a weir that is part of our Belgrove monitoring site on the Waiti River. Okay, sorry. So if it feels like it's been a wet June, you're right. It has. The bar graph on the far right, the orange one, is rainfall for June to date in Richmond. And you can see that it's higher than the green bar below it last year, and blue, the June average. Now, the timescale along the bottom is the hydrographic year that runs from July through to June. So it's timely that we kind of look at the rainfall in that scale today. The lines that run across the top red line is the average for this hydrographic year. And you can see that it's actually 25% higher than the average blue line beneath it and the green line below that. That's for Richmond. And this one here is for Kotinga in the Takaka Valley. And similarly, it's also 25% higher than average. The flow and effect of this is that groundwater levels in both CW2, which is at the Waimea aquifer, and Savages in the Takaka, you can see the red line is on the far right is jumping up to be in line and maybe even exceeding the black line. That black line is the maximum groundwater level recorded at that site. So very high groundwater levels in these locations as a result of that rainfall. These graphs may be familiar to you. They are used during the dry weather task force process for water resource management decision making. Accessing, we're working to provide more access to data and making data accessible in a more interesting way. So this year is showing rainfall sites for across the top of the south. So we've pulled in data from West Coast Regional Council, Marlborough District Council and Nelson all in one site. And that top graph on the right, you can actually change the scale there that Gabby's doing. So you can zoom in and out on different time periods. We hope to have this available on the website at some stage in the future, but at the moment it's just available within targeted folks in the council environment. This video that's about to play is an animated rainfall event. You might remember what the rainfall was like last week, but this is actually a video just kind of replaying hourly rainfall totals across, again, that top of the south sites. Oh no, actually these might, yeah, that's all across the top of the south sites. And that's just the rainfall kind of playing out again, what happened on the 14th and 15th of June. So just exploring some different ways of presenting data and making it interesting and accessible. Skip through those two. Cool. So a lot of work is now being done online, and the rivers and rainfall tab there on the front page of the TDC website are a really popular way of accessing data. We used to operate an old landline-based TDC flow phone, and that has been recently turned off. So data is collected across a range of sites across our region. I'm just going to flick through the spread. This is the rainfall distribution. These are the sites. This is weather stations and air quality monitoring sites, flow monitoring sites, water level monitoring sites, groundwater monitoring sites, and some of the groundwater and river sites also record temperature and electrical conductivity. Sea level monitoring sites. We also we support via contract the Nelson City Council Environmental Monitoring Network, and that's their sites there. And there's 103 consented water meter sites that are telemated. It's just a summary at the end of the continuous environmental monitoring network. In addition to continuous monitoring, we also carry out quarterly groundwater quality monitoring and monthly river water quality monitoring across the region. This is one of the new sites that was installed, Tepawera, a new rain gauge there this year. 3 new groundwater level monitoring sites were installed in the Aorere catchment. The tall instrument in the middle is an RTK survey equipment surveying in the level of the bore there, but equally it's been used to survey in coastal profiles, survey in levels associated with the July floods, pretty much anything you want to determine an accurate level and position. We had 2 sites that were not real-time telemated. This one was upgraded. It's the Fish Creek site, a flow site in the Waikurapuku Springs area. Now, this is that site that I mentioned right at the start. So this is the repair of the Belgrove weir underway. That flood event ripped off half of the weir plate and peeled back the V-notch. So during low flows, we were able to repair that, and it becomes particularly important to record accurate flows in that low flow range. Similarly, that event, so it was about a 20-year flood event, the July floods in both the Waiiti, and this is the Tadmore River. This is our mudstone site, and it was really great to work with the river engineering team, and particularly Rick Lowe, in the repair of this weir at our mudstone site. Richmond Rain Gauge at Red Hills is supports flood management in the Motueka catchment. Here we have a drone recording imagery of flood flows in the Motueka River. The imagery will have surface velocities derived from it. It's quite an innovative way of measuring flood flows. This is footage recorded from a helicopter near Peach Island, and you can see there, this is within the software that's used to determine the velocity lines, and there's also survey points referenced there, and these will be used to geometrically correct the oblique imagery that was recorded. Technology, ADCPs have been part of the hydrologist's toolkit for over 10 years now. There's a acoustic Doppler current profiler located in the sit-on-top kayak that's tethered there. This is, excuse the spelling, the Ariwaka River. And similarly, that same ADCP is located in a remote control boat there. So technologies are enabling us to remove staff from more hazardous river environments. The lady there is Tessa Dredden. She started with us at council 2.5 years ago as a recent graduate. She started as a trainee environmental monitoring officer, and we're really fortunate to have a competency framework to train and develop staff. It's an internally created framework, and we can bring new people into the industry, and alongside on-the-job training, they are also working towards a New Zealand diploma in field hydrology. So on completion of that, they're able to progress to an environmental monitoring officer role. The framework also supports development of advanced technical competencies and the acknowledgement of these skill sets in progressing further to become a senior environmental monitoring officer. This is a pretty valuable tool to be able to recruit staff into a supply short industry, and also assist in the retention of qualified staff. In addition to training, the New Zealand diploma in field hydrology, it's a valuable way of driving towards national standards in data collection, and also in data provision through things like LAWA. So it's a great achievement that Tessa has recently completed the New Zealand Diploma in Field Hydrology. It's a great career progression for her, and it's really positive for council to have trained staff. Here we have another shot. So obtaining trained staff, senior staff, is very difficult at the moment, and we have Holly Rountle, who was a summer student with us, and she's also now on a similar journey, progressing to become an environmental monitoring officer with the team. So that's all I had to say. This may be an opportunity, if you have time, to ask, you might have a pertinent question to ask about the environmental monitoring program. I'll hand it over to the chair. Thank you.
Last slide, or the first slide.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. I found that quite interesting. I mean, obviously from this, flood control and all sorts of issues, is there a commercial usage for this documentation that we do? Are we able to, take a couple of bobs somewhere?
We wish.
No,
so through the chair, Councillor Tuckney, you're right. It's got a huge value, this data that we collect, and it is used. We provide it for design of engineering structures, resource consents, and I don't think we are able to derive money directly from it in a general sense. But you did right; it's got a huge value.
It just seems to me that there's such an incredible amount of information there. And I mean, your abilities and methodology of capturing it is really quite fascinating. We'll might have to think about this one, mightn't we?
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Steve, just a couple of things from myself. Congratulations, and that we personally are finding that rain gauge site in Tapawera really useful, and I know a lot of other people in Tapawera are, because the others are all a bit further away than from the main Tapawera, so it was
That's right.
a good location there. And it's interesting sometimes how you can look at two different sites and the rainfall will be very similar, just give you a bit of a trend over the whole district. I guess my real question is, you talked about water levels at one part there in the presentation. Water levels of what, may I ask? Is that, is that rivers or what?
Yeah, so Jim, I think you might have been referring to about the 5 sites that were water level sites. And so one of those is the Kainui Dam. It's a level. Another one is Salisbury Bridge upstream of our flow recorder on the Aorere. We operate just purely as an advanced level site. And then there's 3 sites that are, one's gone in and 2 are imminent. They're the new radar sites in the Upper Motueka catchment near Te Pauira.
Just for early warning type things.
Correct.
Will that information be available to the wider community or people?
Yes, we'll make that available via the website.
Okay, cheers. Councillor Ogilvie.
Yeah, thanks. And I like Councillor Tufton, quite a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And can we go back to the data on the sea level? I think you have 2 spots there in Tasman, please.
Sure. Are you going? Yeah. About the 4th slide. Hang on a few. Sorry.
To add sites, what sort of cost are we looking at?
Yeah, so we operate 2 sites,
yes.
And recording sea level accurately is actually very challenging. The environment itself is difficult to monitor, operate monitoring sites. And my understanding is that we've had external advice that's advised for our region that 2 sea level sites, monitoring sites in our region is appropriate.
Are appropriate?
Yes.
Thank you. So,
and sorry, there is a 3rd one too that is the Port Nelson sea level site as well.
So is that information coming from NIWA or from, in terms of the accuracy of the level and the difficulty of getting it accurate and for long term?
So we operate the 2 level monitoring sites jointly with NIWA.
Okay, right. So there's none really in Golden Bay, is there?
So one of them is Kaiteritieri,
yes,
and the second one is at Port Tarakoe in Golden Bay.
Okay. No, thank you. That's good. Thank you very much for that.
So, thank you, Steve, for the presentation.
Sorry, I can't hear from here, please.
My apologies, the microphone went off. Rob and Steve, have you got anything further to add to the report?
My only comment would be, feel free to come down and have a chat with us at any time about some of the stuff that's going on.
I do sometimes.
Be happy to talk. And it's nice to see you come through, Stuart.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a resolution in relation to this report, ladies? Yes. Just to receive the report. Someone happy to move? Move Councillor Butler, seconded Councillor Dowler. All those in favour will say aye. Against, carried. 2 more items before we go to the workshop. So contact recreation water quality. Trevor, and I think you've got someone with you. Thank you.
Microphone.
Oh, yeah, microphone. And this is councillors, is the contact recreation water quality season report on page 207. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair and councillors. Before I start, I'd like to just introduce a new staff member. Started about 7 months ago as a catchment enhancement officer. So this is. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hey, kia ora. My name is Emma Woods, and yeah, really great to be here today and enjoyed my first 7 months.
Welcome, Emma.
Emma's role is, as you would have read in the report on bathing water quality, there's a few issues at some of the sites, and it's part of her role is to investigate those issues, to try and find the cause, the sources of the contamination, and then we can do something about them. So there's she had her workload all planned out, and then I did this analysis in this report, and obviously it's thrown up some even more work for her to do there.
So getting into the report, then I take it as read, and just like to point out that this we've had a few more incidences this year, so we're down even for the dry weather condition. But as I mentioned, we do have had several sites that are more at risk of fecal contamination. So the Rewaka site, the Collingwood site, and Rotatai, for example, which have they're sampled every second year generally in our program. And as I mentioned there, we've got some ideas for following up on that, the issues at those sites. And then one of the sites we don't monitor there, Stevens Bay, has received a couple of, this summer just one sewage overflow, but there was another one earlier on as well. I'd like to point that out. And also point out that Pahara Beach, we tried to look at doing some research with ESR to look at the beach sand itself rather than the water, to see whether some of that fecal, the disease-causing organisms are building up in that sand. As it turned out, it didn't appear so. We're going to try again and do another transit further up on the beach, because that's where we often get a lot of the contamination as well. So we'll report back on that next year. So no further ado, I'll open to questions.
Thank you. And we do have some hands up. We'll start with Councillor Mackenzie and then Councillor Hill.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Look, thanks, Trevor, for your report. I did, I was left feeling a little bit uneasy with it though, because I kind of thought we're on a downward trajectory in terms of the quality of our water. And so, I don't think that's, even though we've prided ourselves in the past, I don't think it's a particularly good news story. In particular, I wanted to ask a question about the stormwater discharge at Kaiteriterri Beach. And I'm assuming that that's that great big drain, which is just on the little Kaiteriterri side of the boat ramp at main Kaiteriterri Beach. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, the big plastic black pipe.
Yeah.
Yes, and our monitoring site is about 100 metres just to the south of that.
Okay. The thing that concerns me about that, because in your report it does talk about fecal contamination in the stormwater, is that I've spent a lot of time at that beach, and children are constantly playing around that pipe. So my question really is, do you think from a public health perspective that that's okay, or do we need to do something about that?
We do, and we have put up signs on the pipe itself about 2 years ago. I was meaning to bring one down because they've just been vandalised and removed, and I've got replacement ones to put up. The sign says, "Hey kids, please don't play around here. The water might be contaminated." So we have, yes, I have seen those families and so forth playing around there with the signs. I don't know whether you've experienced it, but I don't see as many people, kids or their parents, playing in that area.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll continue to monitor it, but for some reason, it's like the existence of that pipe there, it's like a draw card is somewhere to play. And I'm just wondering whether, the sign needs to be a little bit more, blunt. But anyway, that's just a comment that I want to make because I am concerned about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It's great to have that level of detail about what's happening. Like Councillor Mackenzie, I'm left with an unease, I think, around some of the things that aren't going so well. In terms of Tata Beach, I was just surprised to read there was an exceedance there. Do we know what that's to do with? Or what the options could be?
Thank you, Councillor Hill. We don't know. On the day, the sampler, CJ from our Takura office, didn't find anything untoward. It could be some sediment in the sample, or just some very intermittent discharge. Tata Beach is one of our exemplar sites. It really is consistently good water quality. So this is very, very unusual. And sometimes we do get maybe a bird has just pooped in the water, or what have you. There's all sorts of odd things that it could be, and I wouldn't get worried over one sample.
No, it surprised me. I spent a lot of time at Tata Beach, and I was pretty surprised to see that there was an exceedance there, really, and I was trying to work out how that might come about. In terms of the Pohara Beach and looking at the sand samples there, is that suggesting that when the tide's up over the sand and you're sampling the water there, that's having an impact, like what's already in the sand? Is that what that means?
Yeah, we tested the sand because research nationally and internationally shows that with this very fine sand that you get at Pohara Beach, and a build-up of algae and also various organic matter, debris, leaves and so forth, can create an environment where enterococci and E. coli, these fecal indicator bacteria that we use, do get to grow, in fact, not just to exist, but to grow. And that was why we were looking in these beach sands. Certainly at the Winter Creek end, that's the eastern end of the beach there's a lot of that debris. And so we weren't surprised to see that it was certainly higher at that end. And then also the Motupipi end, we got all of the Motupipi River coming out there. We also, you may recall in the report, it says that we often get very high levels of fecal indicator bacteria at very high tides as the water pushes up into that debris. It also pushes up into groundwater that might, where there may be some septic tank disposal fields or what have you, and then it sort of draws it out into, well, that's how the theory goes, into that seaward margin. So yes, it's very, very typical to get that situation at the top of the beach at very high tides, and you get very high levels at that time, and that's what we were trying to find.
It's we'd hope, thank you. We'd hope that our septic tank disposal fields were out of the range of high tides, I imagine too. In terms of Paynes Ford, and I read the piece in here about the toxic algae, and the risk to dogs. So at Paynes Ford, is there harm to children there, potentially? A huge swimming site there. Is that a concern or an issue?
Yes, there is a risk to humans, but I would suggest that it's only for unsupervised toddlers that would tend to put that material in their mouth as they're exploring. Those that are crawling around aged less than 1 year or 18 months old. For children older than that, they don't tend to put things in their mouth. So there are very, very few people that are sensitive to this toxic algae through their skin, but it's an incredibly small proportion of people. So there is a risk to adults, but it's consuming it through the mouth that's the main risk. Sometimes you do get events where it's warm and stable base flows, where the mats of these algae lift off and then drift downstream. And so, of course, swimmers swimming in those conditions, if they come up and gulp one of these mats that are floating down, that could be a risk too. But I don't think there's ever been any recorded event of sickness or even death in New Zealand over that. yeah, that I don't know of any.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a final one, if I can. The permanent warning sign at Pohara Creek. Do we know what the options are there around why that's a persistent problem? There must be just one or two, three things that it could be, surely.
We've done extensive investigations through there and done fecal source tracking. Nothing obvious has come up. It's very similar to the Kaiteritiri situation where you've got a drain with a lot of leaf litter, a lot of woody debris, branches and so forth, all sloshing around in that drain. It's really ideal conditions for fecal indicator bacteria. And while in the vast majority of cases out in the beach environment, you're picking up genuine or disease-causing organisms in these environments where there's a lot of, as I say, woody material and leaves and so forth. It might be that these fecal indicator bacteria are non-pathogenic, not causing disease, and but it's still very expensive and difficult to test for that. So we have had some misconnections of sewer and stormwater in that catchment, and we're our engineers, our community infrastructure team for that sewage, they're very onto that and correcting it when they discover it. So it's work in progress, but I'm sorry, we that's as much as I can offer at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Hill, would you like to move the adoption of the contact recreation order?
Yes, I'm happy to.
Thank you. And we have a seconder, Councillor Butler. So moved Councillor Hill, seconded Councillor Butler. All those in favour will say aye.
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 Against, the resolution is carried. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Emma. And then we'll move on to the second last item. I forgot about the chair's report. Yeah, Wachawaka Library redevelopment program completion. We nearly got that video ready, Gabby. Adam.
Thank you, Mr.
Adam,
Chair.
Glenys and Adam, welcome.
Thank you, Mr.
Wachawaka
Chair.
Library completion report.
We're going to take this as read at this quite late stage of the day and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? I think it was reasonably self-explanatory. Councillor Ogilvie.
I was happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'd just like to congratulate you on the report and the whole project, but particularly the report. I thought it covered everything pretty well. So well done. Interesting, the people that were asking for this aren't here, but that's sometimes the case. So any questions or discussion? If not, we'll put the resolution. Oh, Adam, did you have something?
Sorry, I just, I guess from my point of view, running this project, it was a very high profile and at the end of the day, very successful project for council. To build a building like this in these times and still come within budget, I think it's pretty outstanding. And the team, it was all about the team, and so the build team as well as the council team, so Glenys, myself and others worked really well together. And yeah, it was just one of those projects just kind of clicked. So I think it's take some lessons out of this, and there's some really good lessons in here on how to kind of run a project, get it started. The scope and the brief at the start was key, and they really nailed it, and so that allowed it to carry on progressively. So
David first.
Perhaps I should comment, Mr. Chair. Partly why it has been so successful is the work of Adam and Glenys, and behind me Susan Edwards.
Yeah.
The three, and particularly Adam, because he was the project manager, did a vast amount of work personally, I think out of hours as well, to get the project on target and on time as much as it has become. So a big thanks. We have thanked Adam before, but I think formally today is also appropriate to thank him as well.
Yeah, no.
And Glenys and Susan. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm just in the front, right? So I get to run the project, but as I said, it was a team effort, and definitely Susan and Glenys, they deserve all the credit from the scope and the working that they did with Chris before the project even started. So I think that was the key.
So I think the message is thanks for all of yourselves at the front and all the people behind you. And I continue to get reports of how great a project it has actually turned out to be. So it's really good. So someone happy to move that we received the report? Move. Oh, we've done that, have we? Did I put it? No. I'll put the resolution. Been moved and seconded, has it? I can't even remember. Have you got the names, Kathy? Okay. Oh, that's right, it was too. All in favour, please say aye.
It's like today, Mr. Chair.
Aye.
Yeah, aye.
Aye. Against, carried. Right, we have one more item which should. Chair's report, which was way back. What? We can for a minute. Otherwise, we've okay, but we still have a quorum, won't we? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, we will. 7. Yep. So this is the chair's report, which is on page 6 or 7. But Gabby's just going to play a quick video of the Dart Forward, where you may remember last year we had a presentation from the Tapawera Community Council. Our staff and contractors have done a wonderful job, so just let it play, Gab, if it will. Shares. Yeah. Okay. This is looking at the upstream side of the Dart Ford, water running through the culverts very freely. And over here we're going to look at the ford itself, no water running across. And on the downstream side, water flowing through with no rocks, both ways. The only downside is the railway irons just down at the start of the crossing itself. Great job otherwise. So no, it is really a great job, and just took a bit of patience and perseverance. And thanks to all the staff involved, Brian particularly leading that team. And there's some more work to be done to it, some repairs where I showed the railway irons in a hole. And there is some very appropriate signage now saying, don't cross the ford if there's water across it. So it's very simple. If there's water running across it, you don't cross it. If it's clear like it was in the video, you can drive across. So it's a great effort, and appreciate that staff effort. So with that, someone like to, Councillor Dowell, have you got a question or a comment?
No, the meeting we had down the way at the.
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah, I have commented on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just Stuart and I were invited to a meeting to see a possible invention coming through that could help a lot of our waste going to the landfill and using wastewater to process that material. If it takes off, it's going to be quite a revolutionary thing. Yeah, they are. We've got one guy out at Rewalker who has 280 tonne of treated sawdust each month to get rid of it, costing an absolute fortune. This plant will process that and make it clean, and it comes out as oil at the end that can be refined and used in motor vehicles, diesel, and believe it or not, aircraft fuel.
There's a little way to go to a commercial scale, to be fair, but it was a very interesting discussion. So with that, would someone like to move the adoption? Move Councillor Dowler. Do we have a seconder for the chair's report? Thank you, Councillor Turley. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. So I think now we move to the closing carried here. Councillor Hill, are you able to do that, please?
Yeah, just before we do that, I've just had an email and a text from Barry Johnson suggesting that we postpone the workshop this afternoon to August. They've got a slot there where we could do it. He's saying it's quite a big topic. There's quite a lot to cover, and partly due to the biggest day that councillors have had, and I would say also due to the attrition rate. I'd recommend that we postpone until then.
Are you speaking in your role there as the chair of that process? I take it. Yeah. So Barry, would you just like to comment?
yes, it is quite a big topic, involves quite a number of staff, and I think it probably wouldn't do it justice doing that workshop now. We do have an alternative slot.
Particularly with the
Councillor Hill
attrition we've
said.
had, as Councillor Hill's referred to, so I don't think anyone will mind if we don't have it today. It has been a rather long day with some challenging issues, so what we think. Yeah, so you'll advise staff, and those on Zoom will know. So we'll just ask Councillor, before we come to the closing, I'd just like to thank everyone for their attendance and enthusiastic input. And Councillor Hill, if you could do the closing karakia, that would be appreciated.
Sure, kia ora, karake tātou, kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pauna me te moana, aroha atu, aroha mai, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, katoa.
Thank you.
Ora.
Thank you.